Chapter 681. When summer solstice, who hadn't slept all night, walked out of the simple palace that had just been built, she saw Lin Fengting sitting in a daze not far away. Lin Fengting didn't leave Mount Dibing. Now Mount Dibing was severely damaged, and there was no traditional reception area. Lin Fengting found a place to settle down. When she saw him again, summer solstice suddenly realized that she had been busy dealing with the internal affairs of Beihai these days and neglected Lin Fengting. Lin Fengting didn't bother her. Not only did he not, but he seemed to have disappeared from Mount Dibing since he left Beihai. Until today summer solstice saw him again. The place he was sitting on was originally a rockery, but it was cut into a boulder by the messy sword intent. In front of the boulder was a pool. The flowers and plants that were cut into pieces were still floating in the water. It was drizzling and the rain beat on Mount Dibing. Lin Fengting's figure was sitting in the rain, motionless. It seemed that he had been sitting there all night. Summer solstice walked over and stood beside him without saying anything. She suddenly found that she didn't know what to say. The friendship of many years ago seemed to have become thinner and thinner with the constant turbulence of the general trend and wind and rain. They used to be very good friends, but at this time they couldn't find a common topic that belonged to them. Summer solstice was silent for a long time and then whispered, "Have you heard about Senior Li's body?" "I haven't got the latest information yet." Lin Fengting looked at the lotus cut by the sword intent in the pool and shook his head. "There's no way." Summer solstice said, "I just talked to Qingyu on the phone and the conclusion is still the same. There is no hope. Now they are trying their best to wake Senior Li up temporarily. This is the only thing they can do." Lin Fengting was silent. After a long time he took a deep breath and whispered, "Senior Li. Senior Li was very good to us when we were young." Summer solstice's eyes were in a trance. She bit her lip and didn't speak. Li Honghe used to be really good to them. The beauty of the past and the hatred of the present finally became the most complicated feeling in the face of death. At this moment summer solstice really couldn't say anything. "How is Senior Li's situation?" Lin Fengting looked at summer solstice and asked. His vitality was completely exhausted, but his desire to live was strong. However, his completely exhausted body suppressed his will, which was the reason why he fell into a coma. Furthermore, an absolutely powerful will is still working hard to maintain his body, which is the reason why he hasn't died yet. Summer solstice sighed softly. How can a person like Senior Li really not let go of life and death? Since he refused to leave, there should be some unfinished business, right? So I gave a death order. The people of the Nalen family are all here. No matter what, we must make him wake up temporarily. Lin Fengting's gaze was a little erratic. No one knew what he was thinking. Xie Ji inadvertently saw his eyes and was slightly stunned. At this moment Lin Fengting gave her a very strange feeling. His trance didn't seem to be because of Li Honghe's imminent death. At this moment he was obviously thinking of something else. What was he thinking? Summer solstice was curious. "There's no hope?" Lin Fengting was in a daze for a while before he asked in a low voice. Summer solstice was even more curious, but she still shook her head and said, "No." In other words, Lin Fengting's voice was a little bitter. If there's no hope for Senior Li's condition, then there's even less hope for those who are more serious than him, right? More serious? Summer solstice was a little stunned. In her knowledge. No, in the knowledge of modern medicine, there was only one condition more serious than Li Honghe's. That was real death. If a person's vitality is completely exhausted and he has no desire to live, Lin Fengting said in a low voice, "Is there any other way?" "There won't be such a person." Summer solstice looked at Lin Fengting for a long time before she said firmly, "Such a person can only be a dead person." Li Honghe's vitality was completely exhausted. The reason why he didn't die was that his willpower was incredibly tough, so he could barely stay in a coma. The exhaustion of vitality itself was death. If there was no desire to live, how could he live? "I'm not making an assumption." Lin Fengting shook his head. "If there is such a person and he hasn't died for the time being, is there any way for the Wang family of Beihai?" He looked at summer solstice with bloodshot eyes. It was not pleading or other emotions, but a kind of exhaustion that went deep into his bones. Summer solstice only felt a little incredible. She really couldn't think of how a person who had no desire to live and no vitality could live. And what was the form of such a life? Oh. She shook her head. If there is such a person, even if he barely doesn't die, it should be because of special reasons that he can't hold on for long. The Wang family of Beihai has no practical way for the time being. For the time being. Lin Fengting's eyes suddenly lit up. For the time being. Summer Solstice nodded. Lin Fengting's breathing was a little rapid. There was no practical way for the time being. From another perspective, the Wang family of Beihai now had a theoretical way, but it had not been implemented. What way? He asked straightforwardly. The third generation of eternal life. Summer Solstice said and then smiled bitterly. The third generation of eternal life. Our expected effect is to completely activate the exhausted vitality of the human body, and then fill the human body with vitality. But the research on the third generation of eternal life has lasted for several generations. At present, there are still many technical bottlenecks that have not been broken through. And the situation you mentioned is too special. Even if the third generation of eternal life is really developed successfully and that person can hold on until then, we still need someone to contact her in person and record her physical data. Lin Fengting was a little hesitant. He rubbed his temples tiredly. After a long time he whispered, "Okay." His voice was a little hesitant, but he finally made up his mind. "I'll inform the family and let Silver Eyes go there." Is there really such a person? Summer Solstice felt more and more incredible. Lin Fengting smiled bitterly and did not speak. But Nailin, she's going to Tianan. Li Tianlan. Summer Solstice frowned. It doesn't matter. Lin Fengting said calmly, there are people in the Lin clan who take care of the patients. Nailin will go there to see the situation first and then she can come back. The Lin clan will regularly send her physical data so that she can master it in the first place. Summer Solstice narrowed her eyes and nodded. I'll inform Nailin later. Have you ever thought? Lin Fengting suddenly whispered, the life and death of the Wang family of Beihai will one day depend on Nailin? He smiled bitterly. Anyway, I've never thought about it. What do you mean? Summer Solstice's eyes suddenly focused. In the next moment she asked, who is the person you said needs treatment? Lin Fengting shook his head in silence and changed the topic. Is there anything the Lin clan can help with in the research of the third generation of immortality? Talent, materials, anything. His tone was indifferent, but extremely firm with unshakable determination. Li Honghe could not afford to wait for the third generation of immortality. But after all, someone could try and hope for it. We need ice essence, ice heartgrass and some other precious medicines now. If the Lin clan is willing to trade, it's the best. Summer Solstice's tone was a little expectant. Ice essence. Lin Fengting smiled bitterly. Ice heartgrass was the core medicine for making immortality potion. It grew in an extremely harsh environment. The most important thing was that its output was so low that it made people desperate. It was a priceless thing. Most of these things were concentrated in the Wang family of Beihai. But obviously, in order to overcome the technical bottleneck of the third generation of immortality, the Wang family of Beihai had been out of stock in this respect. There were still a few in the Ice Heartgrass Forest clan. But the Lin clan really did not have ice essence, which was difficult to preserve. Looking for it. At present, only a small amount of ice essence had been found in the polar region. Looking for it deliberately was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Moreover, whether it was the Wang family of Beihai or other countries, they all had professional teams that specialized in collecting these precious medicinal materials. But it was not easy to find ice essence. Do you have any information? Lin Fengting suddenly said, which forces or countries have ice essence at present? What do you want to do? Summer Solstice's body shook. At this moment, all she saw in Lin Fengting's eyes was persistence, even madness. She took a deep breath and emphasized, you are the patriarch of the Lin clan. Lin Fengting's intention of asking this could not be clearer. What did he want to do? He wanted to rob it. I'm not anymore. Lin Fengting said faintly, I will leave the Lin clan in the near future, not set up a branch and be a free man. He smiled and joked, if you have any nice code name you can give me one. Well, how about I call myself Sword Emperor? Summer Solstice felt a little ridiculous in her heart, but when she heard Lin Fengting's joke, she could not help but glare at him. Lin Yuxian, the first heir of the Lin clan, left the Lin clan's headquarters. Now Lin Fengting, the patriarch of the Lin clan, also wanted to leave the Lin clan's headquarters? Are you crazy? Summer Solstice asked incredulously. I want information. Lin Fengting did not say much. He was very tired. Really tired. Summer Solstice took several deep breaths and said slowly, "It is difficult to perfectly preserve things like ice essence. The Wang family of Beihai is the best at this point. At present, we don't have exact information about several countries that have the ability to preserve ice essence." "Oh," Lin Fengting said thoughtfully. After an unknown period of time he suddenly asked, "What code name do you think is suitable for me? Sword Emperor? Sword Saint? Third?" Summer Solstice rolled her eyes. When she was about to speak, Tang Shi, the future hostess of the Wang family of Beihai, suddenly trotted over. Summer Solstice was a little surprised and nervous. "What's wrong, Shi?" Yuetong woke up. Tang Shi said with some excitement, "Yuetong just woke up." Summer Solstice was extremely surprised. Lin Fengting also stood up at the same time. "Let's go and have a look." Chapter 682. Wang Yuetong recovered well. Although Xie had only half of the immortality potion with her, the strong vitality it contained was enough to heal most of the fatal injuries in the shortest time. Under the nourishment of the immortality potion, Wang Yuetong, who had slept for a while, not only recovered, but her physical condition was even better than before the injury. But Xianxia, who had been taking care of her for the past few days, could see that Wang Yuetong was haggard. This kind of haggard did not originate from the body. Instead it came from the heart. She saw Wang Yuetong open her eyes. Seeing the confusion on her face after waking up was a normal reaction after being unconscious for a long time. That confusion immediately turned into emptiness. Lifeless, gloomy and disheartened. She lay on the tidy bed and stared at the ceiling in silence. Her eyes, which had lost their usual vigor, blinked for a long time. It was a true emptiness. There were no emotions or thoughts. When Tang Shi hurried over with Xie and Lin Fengting, Xianxia was holding Wang Yuetong's hand and saying something. But no matter what she said, Wang Yuetong did not speak, and even the look in her eyes did not change. "Aunt." Seeing Xie come in, Xianxia stood up and shouted helplessly, "How is it?" Xie's voice was very anxious. No matter how calm she usually was, she was still a mother after all. In the face of her own child she couldn't not care. "He's conscious, but he refuses to speak." Xianxia sighed softly and said, "Her worries are too heavy." Summer Solstice was stunned. She walked to the bed and sat down. Looking at the motionless Wang Yuetong, she whispered, "Tong." Wang Yuetong did not respond. Xie forced a smile and whispered, "Are you hungry? Get up, take a shower and change your clothes. I'll personally cook some of your favorite dishes, okay?" Wang Yuetong's eyes moved. She blinked her clear but dim eyes and tears flowed down silently. Xie's smile became more and more reluctant. All the emotions in her heart were blocked. She forced a smile and said, "Silly girl, you can't talk after sleeping?" "Yes." Wang Yuetong said softly. "Get up and take a bath first, okay? I was in a coma for a few days. I was so dirty." Summer Solstice grabbed her daughter's palm hard and trembled slightly. "Sure." Wang Yuetong nodded. Tears were still flowing down her cheeks and fell on her clothes, but her tone was extremely calm, even a little dead. "What would you like to eat? I'll do it now. You've just woken up. Can you take it easy?" Summer Solstice touched Wang Yuetong's hair. Wang Yuetong didn't dodge and said quietly, "Either is fine." She slowly sat up and wiped away her tears. She got off the bed and said, "I'm going to take a shower." Before he could speak, Lin Fengting coughed and said, "I'm going to take a walk outside." Xie nodded and looked at her daughter's back. Wang Yuetong's delicate figure was as light as a feather, without any vitality, just like a walking corpse. Summer Solstice sighed softly and was lost in thought. "Auntie, if Yuetong is leaving," Tang Shi suddenly spoke hesitantly. Xianxia silently poured a glass of water for Summer Solstice, wanting to say something but hesitating. "What do you want to say?" Summer Solstice looked at her and asked with a smile. Xianxia was in good physical condition. Now she was nearly 3 months pregnant, she was still slim and exquisite, and she didn't have a strong reaction. But she was pregnant with the grandson of the Wang family of Beihai. No matter how much attention she paid to her, it was not too much. Well, Xianxia shook her head and said, "I'm also thinking about this. If Yuetong wants to leave, will Auntie let her go?" When Li Tianlan wanted to forcibly take away the injured Wang Yuetong, it was Lin Fengting who stopped him. But he didn't stop him. Lin Fengting just said that Wang Yuetong could temporarily recuperate in Beihai, but he completely respected her choice after she woke up. Summer Solstice had no objection to this. But now that Wang Yuetong had woken up, what should she do next? Summer Solstice was silent for a long time. She stood up and looked out of the window. It was still raining outside. Lin Fengting stood in the rain and looked into the distance. Standing in this place with many good memories for him, his figure looked a little lonely. Summer Solstice thought of the sword that Wang Yuetong stabbed into her own chest. She shook her head and whispered, "There is no right or wrong choice. As long as you don't regret it, it's worth it." It was worth it. The door of the bathroom was opened. After washing up, Wang Yuetong blow-dried her hair and changed into a clean off-shoulder dress. She called out, "Sister-in-law." She called out this name twice to Tangshi and Xianxia. During the time of taking a bath, her mood seemed to have completely calmed down and was no longer in the state of a walking corpse, but she still looked a little depressed. Summer Solstice, who was in deep thought, looked at the time and said, "I forgot to cook. I'll go now." "No need." Wang Yuetong shook her head, looked at the autumn rain outside the window and whispered, "I want to go out for a walk." She combed her short hair and walked to the door. "Put on your clothes. Don't catch a cold." Tangshi trotted over, took off her little coat and put it on Wang Yuetong. "I'll go with you. I'll take a walk with her." Summer Solstice said, "You and Xianxia also have a rest. You've worked hard these days." Tangshi was stunned and nodded. Wang Yuetong let Tangshi put on her coat. She didn't say anything and just walked out quietly. Lin Fengting turned to look at Wang Yuetong and waved his hand with a smile. Wang Yuetong called him uncle and then walked past him. Lin Fengting was a little confused. He looked at Summer Solstice, who was walking behind him, and followed her silently. The storm that swept Beihai had passed. The autumn rain was hazy, beating on the ruins of Mount Dibing bit by bit. Mount Dibing had few hands now, so the reconstruction progress was relatively slow. When the internal security troops came back after the maneuver, it wouldn't take long to restore the past scene. Wang Yuetong walked silently without any communication with Summer Solstice and Lin Fengting behind her. Along the broken steps, she walked up to the stage of Formidable Person and saw the silver moon inserted on the stone of Formidable Person. Under the gloomy sky, the slender body of the silver moon sword seemed to still emit a hazy silver light. The heartbreaking sword, like a drop of water, gently trembled on Wang Yuetong's chest, as if responding to the sword intent of the silver moon. Wang Yuetong didn't care about that. She looked at the names carved on the stone of Formidable Person for a long time. Below the stage of Formidable Person were the palaces of the Wang family of Beihai that had stood for hundreds of years, but now became ruins. Most of the ruins had been moved away, but a small number of them were still there. The continuous palaces in the past were gone. A large open space appeared on Mount Dibing, cold and desolate. Wang Yuetong walked along the ruins step by step. Her footprints covered the top of the mountain, but she was always silent. Below the top of the mountain, there were still countless flowers and plants on Mount Dibing. In the hazy autumn rain, the fragrance of flowers lingered, and it was still a magnificent scene. Wang Yuetong walked down the path and past many enemies. She went to the sea of flowers that she liked to go to when she was a child, the pavilion where she used to play hide-and-seek with Wang Xingxiao and Tangshi, and the small lake where she used to be in a daze. The autumn rain fell incessantly. She walked on Mount Dibing for a long time and her footprints almost covered the entire mountain. The top of the mountain, the mountainside, and the foot. She had been calm, but now she was silent and solemn. She stared at every corner of Mount Dibing and never spoke. Summer Solstice didn't speak either. She watched her daughter walk all the way down the mountain and seemed to know her daughter's decision, but she never said anything. What is Tianlong doing now? Along the smooth mountain road, when they were about to reach the foot of the mountain, Wang Yuetong suddenly asked softly. Summer Solstice cheered up and said softly, "Senior Li's health is failing. It's hard for him to get through this. Li Tianlong is now accompanying him in Lin. Calculating the time, it's probably in these 2 days." Wang Yuetong's body stiffened for a moment and she didn't speak. Summer Solstice took 2 steps forward and said softly, "Do you want to go to Lin?" If Wang Yuetong wanted to go to Lin, she would not object. At this time, the Wang family of Beihai would go to an important person who was inextricably linked to Li Tianlong. Wang Yuetong would show her goodwill and also represent the Wang family of Beihai to express sincerity. Wang Yuetong was the most suitable candidate. Even if Wang Yuetong stayed with Li Tianlan in the future and never came back, Summer Solstice did not intend to interfere. Wang Yuetong's sword almost left her life on Mount Dibing. It was not the half of immortality potion that saved her but Li Tianlan. If this was Wang Yuetong's final choice, Summer Solstice did not intend to stop her. This was her daughter's own choice. As long as it was worth it. Wang Yuetong was silent for a moment and asked, "Why should I go to Linden?" Summer Solstice was a little stunned. She seemed to have not expected Wang Yuetong's question at all. She was stunned for a moment and then said softly, "Li Tianlan, Li Tianlan." Wang Yuetong laughed. Her voice was pure and without any emotion. "He is an enemy of the Wang family of Beihai. He killed so many people on Mount Dibing. Now his relatives are dying. Isn't it a good thing for Beihai? Why should I go?" Lin Fengting frowned and took a deep look at Wang Yuetong. He suddenly said, "You mean, I have nothing to do with him?" Wang Yuetong said quietly. At this moment she was calmer than ever. The decision she made was also firmer than ever. It didn't matter. He killed so many people on Mount Dibing. He stabbed him with the sword. In the wind and rain that night, when her long sword stabbed her chest resolutely, everything before had passed. She had already died once that night. What she owed Li Tianlan she had paid it all. She couldn't pay it off. Wang Yuetong's eyes were a little dazed. She suddenly thought of what he said when they met and left for the first time. "Then I'll owe you," Wang Yuetong smiled. She didn't need Li Tianlan to be responsible for her future life. She didn't need to be responsible for Li Tianlan anymore. Heavenly sons, mediocre people, success or failure. It had nothing to do with her. Lin Fengting frowned tightly. In the face of this unexpected answer he suddenly did not know what to say. Summer Solstice showed a smile. She smiled with relief. "Tong, welcome home." Her voice was soft and fresh. Wang Yuetong did not respond to her. Standing at the foot of Mount Dibing she turned her head and stared deeply at the place where she grew up. After a long time she whispered, "I'll remember this place." Summer Solstice blinked blankly. "But this place has nothing to do with me." Lin Fengting's face changed. Summer Solstice's expression suddenly stiffened. Wang Yuetong shook her head and took 2 steps back, still looking at Mount Dibing. Her eyes were no longer calm. As her eyes flashed, it was full of that night's saber light, sword shadow and storm. The collapsed ruins, the splashing blood, the scattered corpses and the dazzling sword light. It was Li Tianlan. It was also the Wang family of Beihai. She didn't know how to face the family that had raised her since she was a child. Just like she didn't know how to face Li Tianlan now. If she couldn't face him then she would leave. Wang Yuetong gritted her teeth and glanced at Summer Solstice. "Mom." She whispered, "I'm leaving." She paused and continued, "I won't come back." "Where are you going?" Summer Solstice's face changed dramatically. Wang Yuetong did not answer. She smiled and waved her hand. Then she slowly turned around in the bleak drizzle and left Mount Dibing in the drizzle. She was faint but she had no reluctance to leave. At this moment she was not Li Tianlan's woman. Nor was she the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai. He was just Wang Yuetong. Just herself. Chapter 683. In his sight Wang Yuetong's figure was getting farther and farther away. The sky gradually darkened and the drizzle was slightly chilly. Her calm yet incomparably strong figure became further and further away, more and more indistinct. He went down the mountain and moved forward. Until it disappeared. Wang Yuetong did not even look back. Summer Solstice stood there quietly, motionless like a statue. "Did you tell her your story?" Lin Fengting suddenly asked. Xie was from the Xia clan of the North Sea. Her family used to be an important branch of the Xia clan, but it had long been destroyed. The destruction of the Xia family was directly related to the old patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. But in the end, Summer Solstice still married Wang Tianzong willingly, regardless of everything. This was a story that many people knew. However, very few people knew the reason behind it, not even Lin Fengting. But from Summer Solstice's standpoint, it was not too much to say that the Wang family of Beihai was Summer Solstice's enemy. Just like Li Tianlan and the Wang family of Beihai now. If Wang Yuetong had known the story of Summer Solstice, She might have made a different choice. Maybe she would leave the Wang family of Beihai. But even if she returned to Li Tianlan, it would be better than leaving alone aimlessly. Summer Solstice did not answer Lin Fengting's question. In his sight, Wang Yuetong's figure was getting farther and farther away and finally disappeared completely. Summer Solstice's eyes turned red and she took out her mobile phone. She watched as her daughter walked further and further away, wanting to forcefully pull her back countless times. She could not be Li Tianlan's daughter. As long as she came back, she would still be the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai. Either way was fine. However, the sword light from that night kept flashing in her mind. The sword light pierced Li Tianlan's chest. It pierced Wang Yuetong's chest. Conflict, despair, helplessness, heart-wrenching. All the emotions seemed to be contained in the sword light. Therefore, Xiaxia did not stop her until she was far away. Because Wang Yuetong left peacefully. There was no reluctance or concern, nor was there any conflict or reluctance. That was true peace. She had completely let go of everything and only had her own freedom. Maybe this is for the best. Summer Solstice said softly as if she was talking to herself or telling Lin Fengting. She picked up her phone and began to dial, but her eyes were still looking in the direction where Wang Yuetong had disappeared. In that calmness she could see Wang Yuetong's calmness. She had truly let go of Li Tianlan and the Wang family of Beihai. If this was the ending she chose and believed in, Xiaxia could only choose to bless her. Because choices had nothing to do with right or wrong. The call connected. After a moment of silence, Summer Solstice said softly, "Arrange a car to take Yuetong to the airport." The person on the other end of the phone respectfully agreed. "Arrange it for me while you're at it." Lin Fengting said, "I'm going to Linnan." It was meaningless for him to stay in the Wang family of Beihai now. If Li Honghe died in the near future, Lin Fengting also wanted to see him for the last time. Xiaxia glanced at him and nodded expressionlessly. "Tomorrow." "What? Are you afraid that I will catch up with Yuetong and control her whereabouts in the future?" Lin Fengting saw through Xiaxi's thoughts at a glance. He touched his nose and smiled bitterly. "You can't deny the possibility, can you?" Summer Solstice asked back. Before Lin Fengting could answer, she had already turned around and walked to the top of the mountain. She said calmly, "That's the best. Beihai won't look for her in the future, and I don't want Li Tianlan to find her either." "Her future?" Summer Solstice paused and whispered, "Will she be very happy?" Lin Fengting did not answer. He could not define happiness, and he could not see the future of Wang Yuetong after she left Mount Dibing. Hiding her identity and looking for an ordinary man who might not love her but loved her very much for the rest of her life? Finding a job? Simple 9 to 5? Or... Lin Fengting thought of many possibilities but finally shook his head. He was not sure whether Wang Yuetong would be happy in the future, but he agreed with Summer Solstice's point of view. Such a result might be the best for her. The Wang family of Beihai would eventually stabilize its position. And Emperor Dong's palace would continue to expand. The seeds of hatred had been planted. A weak woman was sandwiched between two superpowers. He could not bear the weight at all. The huge pressure would completely tear her apart, body and soul. It was best to leave. It was best to let it go. A black car with a broken roof went down the mountain road, past Summer Solstice and Lin Fengting, and finally caught up with Wang Yuetong, who was walking alone in silence. "Little princess." The car stopped beside Wang Yuetong. The driver got off immediately and said respectfully, "Madam asked me to take you to the airport." Wang Yuetong was stunned. The wind and rain with the feeling of autumn fell endlessly. She subconsciously tightened the small coat that belonged to Xianxia, nodded silently and sat in the car. The car started slowly and kept moving forward. Wang Yuetong opened the window and looked at the grass and trees outside the window. Hao Palace, Xingzhou City, Mount Dibing, Beihai Province. Firmament in the sea. She remembered it in her heart. What she needed to remember was the past. It was all over. Wang Yuetong closed the window in her eyes. At the moment when the window was closed, a black Mercedes-Benz passed by Wang Yuetong's car, ran in the opposite direction and finally went away. From that day on, the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai, who had been surrounded by countless halos, completely disappeared from the vision of the dark world. The car slowly went east. The black Mercedes-Benz went west. The west was the direction of Mount Dibing. In the back seat of the Mercedes-Benz, Wang Xingxiao, who had just returned from Eastern Europe, opened his eyes. It was Firmament who drove him. The elites of the Wang family of Beihai who had been brought to Eastern Europe by him, and the elites who had been secretly loyal to him, were all left in Eastern Europe by Wang Xiaoyao. Wang Xingxiao had fought for it. But Wang Xiaoyao's attitude was unprecedentedly tough. He let Wang Xingxiao leave Eastern Europe. But he only allowed Wang Xingxiao to take Firmament away. Wang Xingxiao glanced at Firmament and rubbed his forehead. The reason why he let him take Firmament away was not because second uncle didn't want to keep him, but because he felt that he couldn't control Firmament, right? Wang Xingxiao laughed at himself. So, Firmament was worthy of his trust? Young master, do we need to inform madam? Firmament glanced at Wang Xingxiao in the rearview mirror and asked. No need. Wang Xingxiao shook his head. It's just going home. There's no need to hold a welcome ceremony. The house is messy enough. He returned to Mount Dibbing without informing anyone. Wang Xiaoyao had almost completely fallen out with summer solstice, so naturally he would not inform Mount Dibbing. Firmament nodded. Knowing that Wang Xingxiao was in a bad mood, he did not speak. After going back, you'll have to work hard. I don't have many people around me now, so I'll leave this matter to you. Wang Xingxiao let out a long breath as if he wanted to spit out the long-accumulated grievances at one time. Try to arrange some better rooms in Beihai prison. You can tell the prison. Beihai prison? Firmament's expression changed and became a little unnatural. Beihai prison was an enemy that was enough to make many big shots in the dark world pale. The desert prison in Zhengzhou state was known as the most heavily guarded prison in the world, but that was not including Beihai. Few people knew the existence of Beihai prison. Strictly speaking, Beihai prison was the most heavily guarded, expensive and desperate prison in the world. No matter how cruel the desert prison was, it was still on the surface. And Beihai prison was built in the deep sea. Except for a few people, no one knew the specific coordinates of Beihai prison. Even if they knew, there was nothing they could do. The prison was built in the deep sea with a depth of nearly 500 meters, and it never saw the sun all year round. For the prisoners on the opposite side, even if they were at the peak of the invincible realm, they could only wait for death if they were locked up in it. The idea of breaking out of the prison did not exist at all. The North Sea prison was very small and there were very few prisoners that could be locked up. The entire prison was made of a special metal that was a fusion of a variety of alloys. Even with their incredibly sturdy alloys, they still had to deal with the immense pressure of being several hundred meters deep in the ocean, as well as the constant patrols and firepower from the North Sea Legion's navy. This was the most despairing cage they could possibly be trapped in. Firmament wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. He really wanted to ask Wang Xingxiao who he wanted to put in Beihai prison. Wang Xingxiao's tone was extremely calm. Wang Xingxiao's voice was extremely calm. Wang Xingxiao's tone was extremely calm. Brother Jiang? Beihai prison. Firmament's hand that was driving suddenly trembled, and he did not dare to speak. Wang Xingxiao also fell silent. After a long time he suddenly smiled and said, "Before Li Tianlan went up the mountain, Brother Jiang called me." Firmament gave a vague hum and his voice was a little complicated. He transferred most of his forces and chose to face Li Tianlan alone. It seemed that he wanted to humiliate the Wang family of Beihai, but in fact he wanted to preserve the strength of the Wang family of Beihai and humiliate himself. Wang Xingxiao whispered, "At that time I was naive enough to think that everything could be turned around, but now..." He smiled bitterly and said, "Maybe at that time Brother Jiang had already thought about his ending?" The 7 major sword-holding families suffered heavy losses. The Wang family of Beihai suffered heavy losses. The front steps of the stage of Formidable Person were broken. The silver moon sword was still stuck in the stone of Formidable Person. The actual loss and the mental humiliation. During the days when Li Tianlan left Beihai, all the dissatisfaction of Beihai fell on Dijiang. Within the Wang family of Beihai, the sword-holding families, the wealthy families and even the ordinary people all cursed. Dijiang's reputation in the Wang family of Beihai instantly fell to the bottom. Especially what Li Tianlan said to him after defeating Dijiang. No one heard those words. But everyone saw that scene. What was the result? Dijiang was still saying that Li Tianlan didn't say anything at that time. The superpowers of Beihai had been suspicious of Dijiang to the peak. Dijiang seemed to have expected such an ending. It was his own request to go to Beihai prison. It was also Dijiang's request to let Wang Xingxiao come back now. It was the perfect time. Regarding the problem of Dijiang, when summer solstice was still procrastinating, Wang Xingxiao put him in the most desperate Beihai prison. While quelling the curses, he could also win the full support of these people. Dijiang was the stumbling block for Wang Xingxiao to control the Wang family of Beihai. When the Wang family of Beihai needed Wang Xingxiao, this stumbling block rolled aside in the most straightforward way, with countless humiliation and obstacles to Wang Xingxiao's ascension. Wang Xingxiao's eyes were complicated. He muttered to himself, "It's all my incompetence, young master." Firmament hesitated and called him. "Don't comfort me." Wang Xingxiao smiled. It was a forced smile, but it looked more and more natural at this time. "What I don't need now is comfort." He looked out of the window and murmured, "If I wasn't incompetent, if I had the strength like Li Tianlong, I might have been able to help my father in Eastern Europe. Second uncle wouldn't have been so fierce. Brother Jiang wouldn't have been sent to Beihai prison by myself. If I had the strength like Li Tianlong, all of this might not have happened." Firmament clenched his teeth tightly and remained silent. Wang Xingxiao looked at the rain outside the window and took several deep breaths. Then he whispered, "It will get better." Firmament nodded his head vigorously. The phone suddenly rang. Wang Xingxiao took out his mobile phone and looked at the number. He picked it up with a smile and said hello. "Xingxiao." On the phone, Song Si's voice sounded. "Yuetong left Mount Dibing not long ago. She said she wouldn't come back, but she wouldn't go to Li Tianlong either." Wang Xingxiao suddenly turned back and looked at the black car that had passed by him not long ago. The car had gone far away. There was only wind and rain in his sight. Wang Xingxiao's eyes were complicated. He was silent for a long time before he whispered, "Do you want to go?" Song Si was a little confused. Wang Xingxiao smiled and said softly, "I'll send you away. With our child." Chapter 684. September 21st. It was rainy in Linnan. The falling rain sprinkled over the surface of the West Lake and soaked Lonely Mountain. On the misty Lonely Mountain, people walked around in a hurry, and the atmosphere was getting more and more solemn. Representatives of medical families from all over Zhou State had gathered together at this time, seriously discussing Li Honghe's condition. Naylan Dongfeng, known as the physician king of Zhou State, sat in the middle of the famous doctors, holding his forehead with one hand. His eyes were complicated and his face was haggard. More than a dozen doctors who were well known throughout Zhou State were still discussing. But the doctors of the Naylan family were completely silent. 2 hours ago, all of Li Honghe's vital signs had fallen to the lowest point. Naylan Qingyu led people to inject medicine into Li Honghe, barely maintaining his completely exhausted vitality. But everyone in the Naylan family knew that there was really no way. Over the past few days, the Naylan family had united with many medical families in Zhou State to try countless methods. But Li Honghe's vitality, which was almost completely exhausted, had been declining little by little. After the physical data of the test 2 hours ago came out, the Naylan family finally gave up despite their unwillingness. More than a dozen other medical families were still discussing eagerly. They were the ones who were unwilling. With the rise of Li Tianlong and Emperor Dong's palace, countless people wanted to have a relationship with Li Tianlong. It was such a good opportunity. If they could save Li Honghe, not to mention the promotion of their reputation, Li Tianlong's casual words could bring them endless benefits. So these medical families were working hard to find a way. The voices of discussion kept going. But as time went by, fewer and fewer people were still speaking. These famous doctors in Zhou State were the most silent. Naylan Dongfeng raised his head and glanced at his peers around him. He sighed and said softly, "Everyone, I can't do anything about Senior Li's illness. If you still have a way, don't be stingy at this time." No one spoke. Everyone's face was extremely gloomy. Naylan Dongfeng waited for a while, nodded and said softly, "Since everyone has reached a consensus," he stood up and said, "I'll inform His Highness Li Tianlong." Still no one spoke. If there was really a way to cure Li Honghe, everyone wanted to announce the news in front of Li Tianlong in person. But now they were announcing Li Honghe's ending. Only a fool would do such a thing. Naylan Dongfeng stood up and walked out of the hut. He originally wanted to find Li Honghe, but when he glanced around he inadvertently saw a wheelchair not far away. In the wheelchair sat a middle-aged man who had been silent for many days. A beautiful woman with an extremely cold and arrogant temperament was carefully squatting beside the wheelchair. Li Kuang-tu. Nalan Dongfeng hesitated and slowly walked over. Phoenix, who was crouching beside Li Kuang-tu, stood up and nodded to Nalan Dongfeng. Nalan Dongfeng didn't mind. He forced a smile and said softly, "Your Highness." Li Kuang-tu grunted lightly, his voice short and indifferent. He looked at the rippling surface of the lake not far away, his face expressionless. It was the 8th day since he came here. Li Kuang-tu also stayed here for 8 days. But from the first day he came here, Li Kuang-tu never approached Li Honghe's residence, nor did he ask about Li Honghe's condition. He didn't even communicate with anyone. Nalan Dongfeng didn't expect that the relationship between Li Honghe and Li Kuang-tu would be so stiff. He just thought that Li Honghe was not good at expressing himself. He coughed and said carefully, "I want to discuss Mr. Li's illness with you." "Go ahead." Li Kuang-tu nodded. "Well, we've tried many ways to cure Senior Li's body, but so far, none of them can work as expected. Can even be said to be useless. His expression was a little heavy. "I'm sorry, Your Highness. We really tried our best." Nalan Dongfeng was stunned and continued, "But the Nalan family will make a final attempt. We will try our best to wake Senior Li up temporarily. But this way will completely consume Senior Li's exhausted vitality, and even damage his will. It may speed up his death." Nalan Dongfeng opened his mouth and couldn't help but ask, "Your Highness, what do you think?" "Whatever." The corner of Nalan Dongfeng's mouth twitched and he repeated, "It may speed up Senior Li's death. It doesn't matter." Nalan Dongfeng took a deep breath and looked at Li Kuang-tu. Li Kuang-tu was quiet, neither sad nor happy. In Nalan Dongfeng's eyes, all this was a little ridiculous. But no matter how ridiculous it was, at least it was an answer. He nodded with a bitter smile, turned around and went straight to the cabin where Li Honghe was. Li Kuang-tu sat quietly, motionless. Wisps of almost imperceptible sword qi were roaming around his body. He looked at the lake not far away and his eyes became calmer. The purgatory of Heaven Capital had appeared in the Dark World for more than 3 years. But deity rarely took action. So until today no one still understood the real unique skill of the purgatory of Heaven Capital, the Immortality Seal. Even Li Honghe didn't know much about this unique skill that was separated from the 24 moves of sword. Li Kuang-tu struggled to survive when he was infinitely close to death. He started from scratch when his foundation was completely ruined, and finally stepped into the peak of the Invincible Realm again. He broke through the peak of the Invincible Realm in Eastern Europe. All this depended on the Immortality Seal. This unique skill might not be as fierce as the pure 24 moves of sword, nor as extreme as the 6 paths of reincarnation. But in terms of reshaping the foundation, it was truly the #1 martial arts in the Dark World. He returned from Eastern Europe with serious injuries and then went to Linnan. When he felt the first sword energy in his body. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Li Kuang-tu's heart completely settled down. He firmly believed that he could recover. What he needed now was time. Thus he spent all his time silently recovering from his injuries. "Your Highness." Phoenix stood behind Li Kuang-tu and gently massaged his shoulders. She said softly, "Go and see Senior Li. These days Senior Li has been in poor health." "I'm afraid," she hesitated and didn't say anything. "You've brought this upon yourself." Li Kuang-tu shook his head and his tone was indifferent to the extreme. The sword energy jumped slightly on his body. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Look at that cemetery." That cemetery was now the most conspicuous enemy of Lonely Mountain. Thousands of tombstones looked dead and desolate under the gloomy sky. About 1/3 of the tombstones in that cemetery are fake. Li Kuang-tu said slowly, but 2/3 of the tombstones are real. They are the blood of the Li family over the years. Among these people no one's realm is lower than the peak of the fire-flaming realm. These are the backbone of the Li family in those days. Li Kuang-tu said indifferently, if he hadn't been overcautious and kept the so-called friendship with the Wang family of Beihai, the Li family doesn't have to pay these prices. Everyone thinks that the decline of the Li family is my fault. In fact, the fault started with him. In terms of sin, he is more serious than me. Li Kuang-tu took a deep breath and whispered, "He should have died a long time ago." Phoenix looked at him quietly. After a long time she whispered, That's not the whole reason, is it? Li Kuangtu held his breath. He was silent for a long time before he said lightly, of course not. That was only half of the reason. And the other half was because of Li Tianlan. Li Kuangtu thought of Li Honghe's attitude and smiled. He gritted his teeth tightly and his eyes became more and more indifferent. This was his Li family. The Purgatory of Heaven capital was also his Purgatory of Heaven capital. But it was obvious that neither Li Tianlan nor Li Honghe thought so. The simple wooden house was lit with soft lights, dispelling the gloomy light outside. Nalan Qingyu was still carefully examining Li Honghe's body, looking for the last hope. The eldest daughter of the Nalan family had now been clearly identified as the next physician king of the Nalan family and the heir of the patriarch. In terms of talent, she might not be as good as her sister Nalan Shuying, but from the moment silver eyes of Beihai entered the laboratory of Mount Dibbing, she was destined not to be a simple doctor, but the top scientific researcher. In this way, the next generation of the Nalan family all fell on Nalan Qingyu. Nalan Qingyu did not disappoint anyone's expectations. This time in Lin, and in the meetings of countless famous doctors, some of her views were enough to amaze all her peers. Even the contemporary Dr. King Nalan Dongfeng did not overshadow her. At the most pessimistic time, the plan that could temporarily wake Li Honghe up was put forward by her. But in the case where there was still hope, she still made the last effort. But in many cases, efforts couldn't change anything. The wind and rain in Lin, and were getting heavier. Nalan Qingyu, who had been busy, gradually straightened up. Looking at Li Honghe lying on the bed, she was lost in thought. How is it? Li Tianlan's voice sounded behind her. He was sitting on a chair against the wall. His eyes were bloodshot, but his body was still straight, and the lines of his face looked extremely cold and hard. Nalan Qingyu turned around and looked at Li Tianlan. There was an apologetic look in those eyes that were more and more stunning. Li Tianlan seemed to know the answer. An answer that could no longer be regarded as a surprise. He nodded silently and fell silent. In the sound of footsteps, Nalan Dongfeng's figure stepped into the room. Li Tianlan turned his head and glanced at him expressionless. Your Highness. Nalan Dongfeng shouted helplessly. He really didn't like to play the role of this stunning beauty. But this matter was too sensitive. It seemed that only the result given by his identity was the most authoritative. Speak. Li Tianlan said calmly. Nalan Dongfeng's heart sank. This tone suddenly reminded him of Li Kuangtu. Could Li Tianlan be so Buddhist? I'm sorry about Senior Li's current situation, but there's nothing we can do. Carefully, Nalan Dongfeng watched Li Tianlan's expression and said softly. Li Tianlan nodded slowly and said faintly, I'll find someone to send you down the mountain. He paused for a moment, then said emotionlessly, You've worked hard. Nalan Dongfeng was stunned, as if he didn't expect Li Tianlan to be so straightforward. Then he smiled bitterly. Well, although we can't make Senior Li recover, we can make him wake up temporarily. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. What's the consequence? Nalan Dongfeng hesitated and said softly, This will speed up Senior Li's death, but it's not a problem with the medicine we used, but Senior Li's current body can't support him to wake up for a long time. At most, about an hour. Li Tianlan's heart suddenly fell to the bottom. An hour. This also meant that in this life he only had an hour to spend with his grandfather. Scenes of the past emerged in his mind. Li Tianlan clenched his teeth and controlled his emotions. His body trembled a little. What if I don't wake him up? He took several deep breaths, but his voice still fluctuated violently. One day. Nalan Dongfeng was silent for a while and then said dryly, One day at most, and I personally think it's better to let Senior Li wake up than to let him sleep for a day. One day. Li Tianlan murmured to himself. In the sight of Nalan Dongfeng and his daughter Li Tianlan, who had been sitting straight, seemed to be weak in an instant. His sitting posture was still standard, but his spirit instantly slipped to the bottom. This chapter is not over, please turn the page. Nalan Dongfeng hesitated and couldn't help but say, Your Highness, if you let Senior Li wake up, you have to make a decision as soon as possible. Now, time is of the essence. Li Tianlan was silent for a long time. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour. Li Tianlan said nothing. Nalan Dongfeng gritted his teeth, glanced at his daughter and said in a deep voice, Let Senior Li wake up. Li Tianlan still didn't speak. Nalan Qingyu looked at her father in surprise, hesitated and finally called, "Your Highness." Li Tianlong took a deep breath and nodded slowly. Without hesitation, Nalan Qingyu took out a syringe filled with red liquid from the toolbox beside her, and silently injected the liquid into Li Honghe's arm. Li Tianlong stood up shakily, walked to the bedside and held Li Honghe's hand tightly. Nalan Dongfeng couldn't bear to see this scene, so he waved his hand and walked out with Nalan Qingyu. Li Tianlong slowly knelt down in front of Li Honghe's bed, holding his hand. It was a long time. In the almost frozen atmosphere, Li Honghe's eyes moved and he opened them very slowly. Blankness and doubt quickly disappeared from his eyes. He saw Li Tianlong. "Grandpa." Li Tianlong called softly. His voice was very light and calm, but it sounded a little pitiful. Li Honghe's eyes lit up. The corners of his mouth rose and he laughed softly. Li Tianlong, who had been holding back, couldn't help it anymore. His expression began to twitch from the corners of his mouth, and his face was completely distorted. Tears fell in an instant. "Grandpa." He called again in an extremely hoarse voice. It was hoarse, empty and heart-wrenching. No one liked to cry because it didn't look good. But at this moment Li Tianlong, who had held on for too long, was really a little fragile and helpless. "Grandpa." His body trembled and he lowered his head, heartbroken. Li Honghe was still laughing. His last vitality supported him, making him look more and more energetic. "Don't cry." The old and relaxed palm patted the back of Li Tianlong's hand, and Li Honghe's voice was extremely stable. "This day will come sooner or later," he said with a smile, and was extremely open-minded. "It's not too early or too late for me to leave now. At least I can see the future of the Li family." Li Tianlong raised his head, wiped his tears and snot randomly, took a deep breath and said in a trembling voice, "Grandpa, Li Guangtu is also here. He's outside. I'll call him in right away." He wanted to get up, but Li Honghe held his palm. He looked at Li Tianlong with a smile, his eyes kind and gentle, revealing satisfaction and pride. "Don't call him." Li Honghe shook his head and sat up. "Let's go out for a walk." "Grandpa." Li Honghe's expression changed and he subconsciously reached out to help him. "I'm fine." Li Honghe waved his hand and his movement was extremely powerful. "I'm in good condition now." He pushed Li Tianlong's hand away, got out of bed, put on his shoes and said with a smile, "Many people will have this state before they die. It's called the final radiance of the setting sun. Today I know that it's true." He stood up straight, stretched and said with a smile, "It feels good." His last vitality slowly disappeared, and his eyes became dimmer and deeper, but the majestic sword intent still supported his body. He stood in front of Li Tianlong, tidied his clothes for him and asked, "Who else is here?" "Old Master Dongqing is here," Li Tianlong said. Dongqing Hongguang was the most important one. As for the other giants, they would not appear at this time. "Cold light." Li Honghe smiled and said, "It's pretty good. Let's go and meet an old friend with me." Li Tianlong nodded. "Pay attention to your image." Li Honghe wiped Li Tianlong's face and smiled with relief. "You are also a highness now." Li Tianlong forced a smile. A tiny flame flickered on him for a moment. All the tear stains were completely evaporated. However, his eyes were still bloodshot and red. Li Honghe stopped talking, took Li Tianlong and walked out of the hut. There were no more people outside the hut. Doctors from all over the country, the elites of the Li family, Zhou Yuanshan, Dongqing Hongguang, Qin Weibai, everyone saw Li Honghe. The top of the mountain was quiet for a moment. The wind and rain fell on Li Honghe. Li Honghe still smiled. "Senior Li." In the brief silence, no one knew who shouted first. Li Honghe took Li Tianlong's hand, nodded with a smile and looked energetic. Not far away, Li Guangtu, who had been staring at the lake, was stiff. Finally, he slowly turned his wheelchair and looked at Li Honghe, who was smiling with a complicated look in his eyes. Li Honghe also saw him. Li Honghe, who didn't intend to say anything to Li Guangtu, hesitated and finally walked over with Li Tianlong. Phoenix took 2 steps back and bowed slightly to Li Honghe. Li Guangtu didn't move, watching his father getting closer and closer. Li Honghe stopped. The two of them were less than 5 meters apart, looking at each other quietly, separated by the autumn rain. Li Honghe was still smiling. The two, who used to be kind and filial but eventually turned against each other, looked at each other for a long time. Li Honghe finally broke the silence with a smile. He looked at Li Guangtu and said with a faint smile, "I'm leaving." Between father and son. In the face of life and death. Looking at his father, Li Guangtu nodded expressionlessly and said the last words to Li Honghe in his life. "Goodbye." Li Honghe said faintly, took Li Tianlan and turned to leave. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 685. There was no confrontation, no quarrel, no memory. At the border of life and death, the father and son looked at each other for the last time. This was their final farewell. Faint like the autumn wind. Li Tianlan no longer looked at Li Guangtu. He held Li Honghe and walked aside. The hazy rain seemed to cut every inch of space in Lonely Mountain. Li Guangtu sat in the wheelchair and looked at Li Honghe's back motionlessly. The father and son who had parted ways many years ago due to differing ideologies, had quarreled countless times over the years until today. Farewell. The old man was about to enter heaven. And he had long since entered hell. Were there any grudges between them? Li Guangtu did not know. None of this mattered anymore. He looked at Li Honghe's back. The figure who had been extremely tall and resolute in his life, had become as thin as a stick, stooped and weak. Li Guangtu's eyes flickered and his eyes were full of the past. Everything seemed to have come to an end today. Goodbye. Never again. Li Guangtu took a deep breath and remained silent for a long time before saying, "Let daybreak come." Phoenix, who was standing beside him, nodded and said softly, "All right." Li Honghe's pace was steady and his breathing was steady. His condition seemed to be getting better. At the last moment of his life his smile never stopped. He smiled and greeted everyone who passed by, and finally sat on a blue stone on the edge of Lonely Mountain. "Do you remember this place?" Li Honghe gasped and asked with a smile. Li Tianlan stood beside Li Honghe and nodded silently. Wang Tianzong and Gu Xingyun once joined forces to attack Lonely Mountain. Compared with 3 years ago, Lonely Mountain was actually not the same mountain, but it was the same place after all. The newly built Lonely Mountain still retained this huge blue stone, which was one of the few things that did not turn into powder under Wang Tianzong's sword energy. Li Tianlan remembered this place, this position and this blue stone facing the West Lake. More than 3 years ago on this blue stone he carried the dragon vein and stood beside Great Master Wu, quietly watching the metaphysics grandmaster of Zhongzhou state turn into a wisp of smoke with the wind. It was like a reincarnation. 3 years ago he saw Great Master Wu off here. Now he was going to send his grandfather off here. This is the Wu path's enemy. Li Honghe whispered, "Not bad." Li Tianlan did not speak. Li Honghe sat on the blue stone, facing the wind and rain, looking at the rippling West Lake in the rain in front of him and said lightly, "Do you have anything to ask me?" Li Tianlan looked at Li Honghe. His essence, qi and spirit became more and more vigorous, but his entire person seemed to become older. When he spoke he did not look at Li Tianlan but only at West Lake. Li Tianlan stood in front of him and he could vaguely see the hesitation and guilt in his eyes. "No." Li Tianlan suddenly smiled. "Oh." Li Honghe also laughed. "You know the truth of the purgatory of heaven capital. You know Li Guangtu. You know that he is not your father. Do you really have nothing to ask me? For example, who Dongqing Huangtu is, your background, your parents and many other things. Don't you want me to explain them to you?" Dongqing Huangtu. It was the first time Li Tianlan had heard this name from someone other than Qin Weibai. Li Tianlan was silent for a long time. Li Honghe's eyes were in a trance. With Li Tianlan's silence he became a little nervous and helpless. "Oh." Li Tianlan finally shook his head, very calmly, very slowly and very resolutely. "Why not?" Li Honghe looked at Li Tianlan, his eyes fluctuating. "Is none of this important to you?" "It's very important." Li Tianlan looked at the old man with a smile and whispered, "But it's not as important as you." He didn't know how much of the past that the Li family could not let go of was hidden in his background. It might be difficult to talk about it, or it might be involuntary or something else. These were all important. But more importantly, Li Tianlan felt Li Honghe's guilt, nervousness and uneasiness. Li Tianlan suddenly didn't want to know the so-called truth, at least not now. In Li Honghe's last time he just wanted him to go with peace of mind. "The most important thing is that you are my grandfather." Li Tianlan whispered, "That's enough." "Huh." Li Honghe's eyes fluctuated violently. He opened his mouth but for a moment he couldn't say anything. Grandpa, you don't owe me anything. Li Tianlan also sat down on the blue stone and looked into the distance. Maybe I owed you at the beginning, but over the years, you've already made up for what should be made up for. The Li family doesn't owe me anything. You and the Li family have given me everything you can, which is worthy of what I've suffered. He looked into Li Honghe's eyes and whispered, so if you really want to leave today, please rest assured that the Li family will have me in the future. No matter what, you are my grandfather, the best grandfather. So when you get up there, take a good look. The Li family, I've given you the best Li family. Li Honghe held Li Tianlan's hand tightly. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. His arm trembled slightly because of the effort. Looking at Li Tianlan, he opened his mouth several times, but finally smiled, nodded and said, okay. Tell me what happened to you in Beihai. Li Honghe whispered, I want to hear it. Li Tianlan was silent for a moment and shook his head. There's nothing to say. I've done what I should do and I've got what I should get. He paused, thought of the bleak sword light and muttered to himself, I've lost what I should lose. He raised his palm and the sword light bloomed quietly. The 13th floor appeared beside Li Tianlan. Famous swords appeared in Li Honghe's eyes one after another, all of which he was most familiar with. Autumn water, colored glass, star dome, amber. Except for the broken world and tide, all the famous swords of the Wang family of Beihai were in the 13th floor at this time. There were only 3 famous swords that really belonged to the sword formation of the 13th floor. Shenyuan sword, aquamarine sword and twilight sword. The 3 delicate small swords rotated slightly around Li Tianlan, dexterous and docile. Li Honghe watched this scene quietly and whispered, Human Emperor. He shook his head. This incredible sword formation has never been seen before. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and looked at Shenyuan's sword. Is it really the human emperor? Yes and no. Li Honghe shook his head. It can be regarded as the human emperor or not. But it has nothing to do with the human emperor of the Wang family of Beihai, at least not now. Such a sword formation, such a sword. Li Honghe was silent for a moment and whispered, this can no longer be regarded as simple swordsmanship and martial arts. The combination of the peak sword intent, the strongest fate, the perfect materials, the strong killing intent and countless conditions leads to such a sword formation. It has life, thoughts and emotions. He looked at Li Tianlan and sighed. You left the other swords in Beihai. I think you discovered the secret of this sword formation. So you want to use those swords to absorb the fate of the Wang family of Beihai? Li Tianlan did not answer. Li Honghe seemed to want to say something more, but in the end he did not. He turned his head and looked around. Not far away, Qin Weibai, who was dressed in plain clothes but still looked like a beautiful scenery, stood there and looked at Li Tianlan tenderly. Li Honghe suddenly smiled and waved at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai hesitated and walked over slowly. She looked at Li Honghe with calm eyes. Thank you. Li Honghe looked at the most incredible woman he had ever seen. He smiled and thanked her. If there were no Samsara Palace, maybe Li Tianlan would still be silently enduring, waiting for the opportunity to develop. For 10 years, 20 years or even his whole life he would aim to restore the glory of the Li family. But now it was completely different. He could see Li Tianlan's future and the Li family's future. He could leave with peace of mind. This, thank you, was from the bottom of his heart. Qin Weibai shook her head and said calmly, I don't deserve it. Li Honghe took a deep look at Qin Weibai and shook his head. It's the same. At least it's the same for me. Qin Weibai suddenly looked up at Li Honghe, seeming a little surprised. I have a question. Li Honghe suddenly said, I'm just curious. I have no other thoughts. Before I leave, I just want to figure out whether you killed a man named Huo more than 3 years ago. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. At this time the person Li Honghe cared about couldn't be a simple person. So in the next second he and Qin Weibai asked together, Who is Huo? Li Honghe froze for a moment and looked at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai was a little confused. She seemed to think of something and a strange look flashed in her eyes. The celestial emperor of Huo? Li Honghe narrowed his eyes and thought about it. He turned his head and glanced in the direction of Li Guangtu, whispering, I see. Qin Weibai didn't speak. It's all right. Li Honghe suddenly smiled and held Li Tianlan's hand, whispering, I always think Tianlan is the best. And the strongest. Of course. Qin Weibai nodded seriously. Li Honghe coughed and looked over Qin Weibai. Less than 20 meters behind them, the few veterans of the Li family, Dongqing Hongguang, Zhou Yuanshan, and others gathered together. Li Honghe nodded to them. Dongqing Hongguang hesitated and walked over slowly. Everyone followed him. Li Honghe's eyes fell on the veterans of the Li family, and his eyes were soft. His breathing gradually became rapid, and his good state began to become weary. The Li family. Without any nonsense, he whispered. The future of the Li family depends on Tianlan. I hope you can help him more. This was undoubtedly the most important last words, representing the will of the Li family's inheritance. Several veterans of the Li family nodded. They were mentally prepared, but when the moment really came and they saw that Li Honghe was about to leave, great sadness still surged out. It was not an emotional breakdown but a kind of powerless numbness. Everyone has times when they can't do anything. Li Honghe gasped a few times and said with a low laugh, "This chapter is not over. Please turn the page." People say that I'm good at making arrangements, but personal ideas can't reverse the general trend. I've done a lot of wrong things in my life, but I have to do a lot of things even though I know they're wrong. He grasped Li Tianlan's palm tightly. Over the years, the Li family has not been safe and there are crises everywhere. The collapse of the Li family was so sudden that I had no time to prepare a way out. So when the Li family collapsed, I could only take you with me. Over the years, you have proved your loyalty to the Li family. You are the greatest pride of the Li family and the most feared power of the enemy. But there are too many, really too many. The scale of more than 1,000 people, a large number of high-end combat forces. There is no way for us to survive if we all gather together. So you've all seen what I've done. People die every year. Some people really die and some people leave Zhongzhou state in the name of death. This is the predecessor of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. I actually didn't want to establish the Purgatory of Heaven capital, or I didn't find a suitable helmsman for the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Li Guangtu was too ambitious and his character was too extreme. He was not the most suitable candidate. No, he was not even a qualified candidate. But at that time he was the only choice. I knew at that time that once he and the Purgatory of Heaven capital grew up, there would definitely be today's situation, but I had no choice. Many of you have joined the Purgatory of Heaven capital. They are all your old friends and Tianlan's elders. If I still have time in the next few years, my biggest goal is to take the Purgatory of Heaven capital back from Li Guangtu and give it to Tianlan. Li Guangtu's eyes gradually lost focus and everything in his sight began to distort and become blurred. What a pity. There was regret in his voice. I have time to make arrangements, but I don't have time to take it all back. The establishment of the Purgatory of Heaven capital can barely be said to preserve the core strength of the Li family. So, I beg you to carry out my last order. In any case, don't let the Purgatory of Heaven capital fall into the hands of Li Guangtu. The future of the Li family belongs to Tianlan and only Tianlan. Li Honghe smiled bitterly. I can't do anything, so, please. Senior Li, don't worry. A veteran of the Li family stood up and said in a deep voice, "We will do our best to help young master, and at the same time contact those old guys in the Purgatory of Heaven capital." Li Honghe grunted, turned his head with difficulty and looked at Dongqing Hongguang. He wanted to say something but there was really no time. He looked at Dongqing Hongguang and smiled helplessly. "I'm sorry." He tried to breathe, feeling that the flame in his body was burning his internal organs. His vitality was burned away, leaving only a tenacious will. Dongqing Hongguang shook his head and whispered, "Don't talk about this between you and me. Tianlan is very good." Li Honghe murmured, "No, he's the best. But he's still too young. After I leave, keep an eye on him and take care of him for me." "Don't worry," Dongqing Hongguang said in a deep voice. "The Dongqing clan will do its best to support Tianlan." Li Honghe muttered to himself, "Okay." He grabbed Li Tianlan's palm hard and whispered, "Tianlan." Li Tianlan grunted and sat on the blue stone, but he didn't look at Li Honghe. Li Honghe reluctantly pointed in the direction of Dongqing Hongguang. His voice was weak but he used all his strength. "Call me Grandpa." Li Tianlan's body shook violently. Dongqing Hongguang suddenly looked up. Li Honghe's last vitality supported him tenaciously and he repeated, "Call me Grandpa." At this moment, Li Tianlan suddenly panicked. Looking at everyone's eyes, he subconsciously glanced at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai grabbed Li Tianlan's other palm, looked at Dongqing Hongguang and whispered with a smile, "Grandpa." Dongqing Hongguang froze for a moment and so did everyone else. Hey. Dongqing Hongguang looked at Qin Weibai and responded in a panic. Li Tianlan's body was a little stiff. "Call me Grandpa," Li Honghe insisted and repeated almost stubbornly. "Grandpa." "Grandpa." Li Tianlan took a deep breath, looked at Dongqing Hongguang and called him in a very dry voice. Good children, all good children." Dongqing Hongguang looked at Li Tianlan and then at Qin Weibai, extremely excited, and his voice trembled. Li Honghe's voice stopped. His sight had become dark, but he still looked in the direction of Dongqing Hongguang. "I won't let you down," he whispered and held Li Tianlan's palm tightly. It was still raining. A gust of autumn wind blew over Lonely Mountain, extremely soft. The last trace of sword intent bloomed on the blue stone. Li Honghe's figure began to break. Flesh, skin and the whole body. The autumn wind blew over. His old figure was completely blown away. Li Tianlan's palm was slightly lighter. Li Honghe's body disappeared. Completely dissipated. Sorrowful cries rang out on Lonely Mountain. Li Tianlan didn't move. He sat quietly on the blue stone, looking at the rippling lake in front of him and remained silent for a long time. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 686. September 23rd. Lin. It was raining cats and dogs. Under the secret gaze of the entire Zhongzhou state and even the entire Dark World, the storm that everyone had been waiting for finally swept through the Dark World. Li Honghe, the former leader of Zhongzhou state, the leader of the Li family, the closest partner of Beihai province, and the former state-protecting god of war of Zhongzhou state who had guarded Zhongzhou state for 32 years, passed away at the age of 89. The old man who guarded Zhongzhou state and supported the Li family, seemed to be able to shoulder all the weight, had finally come to the end of his life. He had been glorious, down and forbearing. He still had regrets in his life, but he died peacefully. On August 21st, the news of Li Honghe's death spread throughout Zhongzhou state and the whole Dark World. The noisy Dark World seemed to have quietened down. The situation was changing and the general trend was roaring. In the countless years of inheritance, the Li family had always been recognized as an opponent by all the superpowers, whether in the clouds or in the clouds. Li Honghe was also recognized as an enemy by all the superpowers. Li Honghe died. The rise of Li Tianlan. Alternating rising and falling. Everyone agreed that this was both the end and the beginning of the Li family. The Sword Emperor was silent, the Sky Blade had fallen and the God of War had passed away. Purgatory of Heaven Capital, Samsara Palace, Vatican, Kunlun City, Heroes Club, Polar Ground Alliance, Men in Black, Jiang family of South America, one force after another. The high-end combat strength that once stood at the peak of the era was constantly declining. They were either on the verge of death or completely annihilated. The divine and holy lists, which represented the peak of the Dark World, were mostly empty. Someone exited the stage. Similarly, someone had just entered the arena. Wei Kunlun of Mount Shu, the king of North Xishai, Dijiang. New invincible realm experts began to appear one after another. The previous era was still stubbornly leaving a shadow under the sky, but the new era had clearly revealed its true appearance. Li Honghe's death made more and more people realize that the past era seemed to be about to become a thing of the past. In different places, different people began to gather in Lin. Noon of the 23rd. Headed by Li Huaqing, all 9 members of the Zhongzhou parliament were present, including Dongqing Wudi, the minister of the army headquarters who had just returned from Beihai. 29 parliamentarians of Zhongzhou state, the ministers of the 4 secret service headquarters of Zhongzhou state, the director of the supervisory council, and the directors of the special operations bureaus of various provinces also climbed Lonely Mountain one after another. Kunlun City, Mount Shu, Sai City, Jade Pool, Azura Path, the Shadow Sect and the Great Soaring Temple, which had been lingering at the edge of the Dark World, had also sent out important figures. Wang Xingxiao came to Lonely Mountain on behalf of the Wang family of Beihai. Li Baitian, Ning Qianqing and the others rushed back from Tianan. Daybreak entered Zhongzhou state alone on behalf of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Each theater of operations in Zhongzhou state sent representatives to express their sincerity. Star State, England, France, Germany, Italy, Snow Country and the Vatican. The secret service centers of nearly 20 countries, including the nearby Gaoshan State, Heng State and Annan State, called Zhongzhou State to express their regret for Li Honghe's death. Even the major dark forces that were in turmoil sent important figures to Lin, and as soon as possible. Given Li Honghe's status, his death was fully qualified to be broadcasted in Zhongzhou State. However, the Special Warfare System had always been an organization in the dark, so the media in Zhongzhou State were silent. But the real standard could be said to be the highest in years. President Li Huaqing of Zhongzhou State personally delivered a eulogy, deeply cherishing Li Honghe's contributions to Zhongzhou State, clearly expressing Zhongzhou State's deep sorrow for losing Li Honghe. At the solemn funeral, under the heavy rain, countless people stood in the heavy rain. From beginning to end, no one left early. There was no farewell ceremony. Li Honghe's body turned into a wisp of breeze on Lonely Mountain with the sword in tent. The coffin prepared by Li Tianlan only contained some of Li Honghe's clothes. The coffin was buried at the highest point of the Li family's cemetery. From beginning to end, Li Guangtu did not attend this simple but extremely grand funeral. Only Li Tianlan. Only he was alone. He refused anyone's help. Carrying the coffin, burying the earth. Everyone looked at him, watching him busy all by himself in silence. That kind of sorrow was so calm, but it also carried a kind of unprecedented determination. Today the Li family was really only left by himself. In the sense of inheritance, he was the last person of the Li family. But no one thought that such a Li family was down and out. If it were more than 3 years ago, the death of Li Honghe would also have such a scene today. But perhaps just after the funeral, Li Tianlan would also disappear. But now, the old era was over. Wei Kunlun Wang Xiaoyao Dijiang. The new invincible realm was growing. But under the sky of the new era, Li Tianlan, who had not yet entered the invincible realm, was more brilliant than anyone else. This was his era. Even if he was the only one left in the Li family, this was still the era of the Li family. Even if he was the only one left, the current Li family was still the top wealthy family in Zhongzhou State. It was nearly evening when the funeral officially ended. But most people did not leave Lonely Mountain. By now, no one thought that Li Honghe's death was the beginning of the Li family's demise. On the contrary, the Li family without Li Honghe was more threatening in others' hearts. Li Tianlan's growth was now almost unstoppable. After the end of the chaos in Eastern Europe, he penetrated the entire Beihai province in an almost invincible manner. The whole dark world had begun to take Li Tianlan's rise seriously. Li Honghe's death was a good opportunity for them to get in touch with Li Tianlan. No one intended to leave so easily. Some talked about cooperation, some tested Li Tianlan's attitude, and some even wanted to join the East Emperor Palace. Everyone had different ideas. In addition to Li Tianlan, there was another person on Lonely Mountain who was also the focus of attention. Li Guangtu, the Purgatory of Heaven capital. The Li family had been lurking for 20 years and constantly enriched the strength of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. After the final battle of Heaven capital broke out more than 3 years ago, the Purgatory of Heaven capital became the master of East Island. After more than 3 years of development, it could be regarded as a very stable superpower. Li Guangtu's identity was sensitive. After it was exposed, the situation of the Purgatory of Heaven capital was extremely delicate. Whether to stay in East Island or return to Zhongzhou State, any choice could bring great variables, and variables often meant benefits. So when many people pestered Li Tianlan, there were also some people who wanted to see Li Guangtu and know his attitude in the future. But so far Li Guangtu had not shown up at all. Not only did he not show up, but the wooden house where he was had been completely blocked. The elites of the Zhongzhou State Shadow Sect had quietly isolated the area where Li Guangtu was, blocking everyone from approaching. At this moment, in the gradually dimming sky, President Li Huaqing of Zhongzhou State was sitting opposite Li Guangtu. Beside Li Guangtu was the expressionless phoenix. And Daybreak with an indifferent expression. Beside Li Huaqing sat an old man with white hair and beard. And the representative of Kunlun City who came to Lonely Mountain. Gu Qianchuan. In the more than 20 years since the treason case, this was the first time that Li Guangtu had formally faced the high-level officials of Zhongzhou State. It was also the first time that he had formally faced Kunlun City. Gu Qianchuan. Li Guangtu. There was no doubt that Li Huaqing wanted to figure out the treason case. This was a face-to-face confrontation. Chapter 687. The atmosphere in the room was dull and depressing. The sky was getting darker and darker. The dim light shone in the shabby room. Everyone's expression seemed to be hidden in the darkness, which looked vague and weird. Phoenix, with a cold expression, poured a glass of water for Li Huaqing and the old man next to him. As for Gu Qianchuan, he was directly ignored. Gu Qianchuan did not respond. Sitting opposite Li Guangtu on behalf of Kunlun City, he lowered his head slightly, narrowed his eyes and wandered quietly in every corner. "Thank you." Li Huaqing took the glass of water handed by Phoenix and said with a smile. Phoenix did not respond. No one spoke. The atmosphere in the narrow space became more and more depressing. Li Huaqing bowed his head and drank some water. He looked at Li Guangtu quietly and narrowed his eyes slightly. He was not familiar with Li Guangtu. More than 20 years ago, when Li Guangtu was at his peak, the academics were far less than what they were today. At that time he was still the deputy speaker of Liaodong, competing with others for the position of governor. With his rank at that time he could barely be regarded as a person in Li Guangtu's eyes, but that was all. The two had met several times on different occasions and at most they were acquaintances who nodded at each other. Therefore, in order to get in touch with Li Guangtu this time, Li Huaqing brought not only Gu Qianchuan but also a former director of Zhou State. In silence, Li Huaqing turned his head slightly and looked at the old man next to him. The old man's surname was Yang and his first name was Feng. Perhaps not many people in Zhou State remembered this name now, but more than 20 years ago he was an iron-fisted figure who was famous in Zhou State. He was a former director of Zhou State's parliament and the minister of supervision of Zhou State at that time. Yang Feng's position at that time could be said to be the strongest supporter of the Southeast Group. Before entering the center of Zhou State, he was the speaker of Xianxia. Since he could serve as the top leader in the core base camp of the Li family, his position was self-evident. When the Wang family of Beihai and the Li family jointly controlled the Southeast Group, Yang Feng was Li Honghe's most trusted giant. Therefore, after the treason case broke out, even though he knew there was something fishy, Yang Feng still advocated a thorough investigation, supported Li Honghe and the Li family, and even broke with the backbone of the Wang family of Beihai in the Southeast Group. With the collapse of the Li family, there were many senior officials like Yang Feng, but there was only one ending: purge. With the shuffling of the cards again and again, the vast majority of high-ranking officials who were once loyal to the Li family left the stage of power. As a director magnate of the central state, Yang Feng didn't have a good ending, but his early retirement wasn't too bad. Too many things had been covered up by the victor's propaganda over and over again. Yang Feng, this tough and iron-fisted figure, gradually disappeared from the memory of many people. It wasn't until Li Honghe died and the Li family rose that Yang Feng, who had been living the rest of his life in Yuzhou, was invited by Li Huaqing. Yang Feng felt Li Huaqing's gaze and frowned slightly. He hesitated and was just about to speak, when Li Guangtu took the initiative to speak, breaking the oppressive silence. His gaze swept Li Huaqing and then fell on Yang Feng. He nodded and said in a calm tone, "Uncle Yang, long time no see. How are you?" "Average." Yang Feng shook his head. He came from a military background. Even in his old age, his sitting posture was still ramrod straight. Coupled with his unyielding way of life, most of the time, he exuded a cold aura from the inside out. But at this moment, although he was as cold as before, he had an unconcealable haggardness and looked extremely helpless. No one could specifically explain how much of a blow Li Honghe's death had dealt to Yang Feng. The two had been friends for many years and it was a true lifelong friendship. At the time, Li Honghe was allowed to take thousands of high-level combatants of the Central State's special warfare system to the border and preserve the last bit of the Li family's foundation. Yang Feng and Wu Jingmin had made great contributions. Even though he retired early, he used his influence to create a relatively good situation for the Li family. Every time Li Honghe left the camp at the border, he would definitely go to Yuzhou to see Yang Feng. Ordinary people couldn't understand this kind of friendship. When the news of Li Honghe's death spread throughout the central state, Yang Feng seemed to have aged in an instant. Even now he still had a low fever. It was only because of Li Guangtu that he had to come. "I've been very quiet these years. No one has disturbed me, so I've cultivated my mind." Yang Feng held the cup and drank water. His arms were trembling in the dark. A former director of the central state had been undisturbed after his retirement. This was not a good thing at all. It could only show that he had been excluded from the upper circle by those in power. Li Huaqing coughed, feeling a little embarrassed. It's the Li family who let you down. Li Guangtu said softly. His eyes were sincere and full of guilt. No matter how extreme his character was, he would respect and feel guilty for the old man who had given everything to the Li family. He and I both let you down. This he referred to Li Honghe. Yang Feng looked at Li Guangtu with a complicated look in his eyes. What happened back then? In the past 2 decades, the case of treason had been the most sensitive event. Some information required a very high level of authority. The information of the case of treason had now been classified as confidential files. If one wanted to read it, one needed at least the authority of a general in the military or the special warfare system. Yang Feng was a director of the central state at that time, so there was no problem with his authority. But the important thing was that even if he turned over the information, it still could not explain too many problems. The case of treason broke out too quickly and too violently, like a frenzied thunderstorm. After the thunderclap, the whole central state had been turned upside down. In less than 6 hours, nearly 100,000 elites of the central state were almost wiped out. Invincible realm experts were seriously injured, their murderous weapons were broken, and countless thundershocking realm experts were killed. Blood flowed like a river. Until today, except for those involved, no one knew the tragic truth. No one knew how tragic the truth was buried in the countless bones and blood. Back then, Li Guangtu thought for a moment, then shook his head and smiled. It doesn't matter. What's the point of mentioning it now? Of course it's meaningful, Li Huaqing said with a smile. He looked at Li Guangtu with sincere and gentle eyes. In fact, Zhou state has never investigated the case of treason. Even now it's not settled. At most it can only be regarded as putting aside the dispute. The Li family has been the pillar of the country for hundreds of years. Personally, I believe in the Li family's loyalty to Zhou state. Even after the case of treason, Senior Li's actions over the years have proved this. So if there's something hidden in the case of treason, you can tell me. I promise in the name of the president of Zhou state that Zhou state will investigate it thoroughly and find out the truth. Tut-tut, Li Guangtu shook his head with a smile and looked at Li Huaqing. His attitude was neither arrogant nor low-key, just plain. And then, Li Huaqing was slightly stunned. This simple rhetorical question contained too many meanings at this time. He thought for a moment and said calmly, if there's something hidden in the case of treason, when we find out the truth, we'll give everyone an explanation. His words were very neutral. Even from a personal standpoint, he was willing to believe in the loyalty of the Li family, but his current identity was still the president of Zhou state. Li Guangtu did not speak. Li Huaqing knocked on the table in front of him and said calmly, if it turns out that you didn't commit treason, the parliament of Zhou state is willing to apologize to the Li family and you. We welcome you back to Zhou state. Li Guangtu raised his eyebrows. Is this the attitude of the parliament? For the time being, this is just my attitude, Li Huaqing said calmly. Guangtu, at least we have to figure out what happened that year so that we can discuss a suitable solution. Yang Feng took a deep breath and said calmly in a gentle tone. Li Guangtu was silent for a moment, nodded and said flatly, ask him. He glanced at Gu Qianquan, who had been lowering his head, and said with a faint smile, why? There's money on the ground to pick up? You're even reluctant to raise your head? I know you. You participated in the siege against me, but your strength was not so good at that time. Oh, I'm sorry, your strength is not so good now. Gu Qianquan suddenly raised his head and stared at Li Guangtu. Li Guangtu narrowed his eyes, and his expression was cold and almost feminine. Gu Qianquan gritted his teeth, sneered, and did not speak. Qianquan, you were also one of the people involved in that year. Why don't you tell me about the situation at that time? Li Huaqing said calmly. I can't remember many details because it's been too long. Gu Qianquan took a deep breath and said expressionlessly. Tell me about it. Li Huaqing looked at Gu Qianquan and his tone was vaguely tough. Gu Qianquan took a deep breath and said coldly, more than 20 years ago, shortly after Li Guangtu was the commander of the Border Control Corps, he publicly made radical remarks about the border war at a corps meeting. Led by Annan State, several countries in Southeast Asia expressed their dissatisfaction. When the situation was chaotic, the Border Control Corps decided to carry out a joint maneuver with the Southern Theater of Operations. Many martial arts forces and special warfare organizations of Xianxia state were invited. During the maneuver, the Border Control Corps crossed the border of Xianxia state and regarded part of the Annan state area as part of the battlefield. Gu Qianchuan paused and glanced at Li Guangtu. But when the maneuver was about to end, Kunlun City found traces of large-scale mobilization of the Annan army. At the same time, we found that Major General Li Pingqing of the Border Control Corps was leaving the territory with the Great Wall Plan of the Border Control Corps. Kunlun City intercepted him at once and reported to Li Guangtu. Li Guangtu sent people to intercept him. At that time, Li Pingqing, who was only at the peak of the fire-flaming realm, led a small number of subordinates and broke through the blockade of several thundershocking realm experts belonging to the Li family. Gu Qianchuan sneered and continued. Nearly an hour after the incident, Senior Colonel Hu Song, the Minister of the Information Department of the Border Control Corps, intercepted the communication signal at that time. At that time, we knew that Li Pingqing's defection was authorized by Li Guangtu. He used his authority to take away a lot of important data of the Great Wall Plan and gave it to Li Pingqing. The call records at that time are still kept in the archives of Xianxia state. The evidence is conclusive. Kunlun City thought that Li Guangtu was suspected of treason and reported it to the Parliament of Xianxia state immediately. But as a result, Gu Qianchuan said no more. It was clear what the result was. The fiercest battle in Xianxia state in recent years broke out on the border. The Li family completely collapsed and the turmoil continued to this day. Which member of the parliament gave the order? Li Guangtu looked at Gu Qianchuan and asked with a playful look. It was Vice President Chen Wanning. Gu Qianchuan gave the answer without hesitation. Yang Feng sighed. Li Guangtu smiled and said nothing. Chen Wanning, the vice president more than 20 years ago, had died of illness a few years ago. Unlike Yang Feng, even after retirement, Chen Wanning was still the top boss of the Southeast Group. Chen Wanning came from the Chen clan of Beihai. He had served as the deputy speaker of Wuxia, the governor, the speaker of Beihai province and the vice president. He could be said to be the absolute hardcore of the Wang family of Beihai. There was no Kunlun City more than 20 years ago. The Gu clan did not even have a member of parliament. They could not set off such a big storm only by relying on Kunlun City without high-level power. It was the most reasonable thing for the high level of the Wang family of Beihai to intervene. The procedure is wrong in this matter. Yang Feng said lightly. He knew about this matter. Naturally, he also knew Chen Wanning's role in it. Procedure no, he had said this many times in the past. At that time the situation was urgent. The only person we could contact was Vice President Chen Wanning. Gu Qianchuan replied indifferently. According to the normal procedure, if there was a problem with the position of the commander of the Border Control Corps, Gu Xingyun should have reported it to Li Honghe, the top leader of the special warfare system of Xianxia state. Even if Li Honghe needed to avoid arousing suspicion, he could have reported the problem to Dongqing Hongguang, the then minister of the army headquarters, and reported it directly to Chen Wanning. The procedure was indeed wrong or even outrageous. But compared with the treason case, this outrageous problem was nothing at all. Li Huaqing looked at Li Guangtu and said slowly, "Is Li Pingqing true?" He did not want to hear Li Pingqing's problem but Li Guangtu's opinion. Li Pingqing once served as a major general of the Border Control Corps. When the treason case occurred, he finally died in the territory of Annan state. At that time, important information about the Great Wall Plan of Xianxia state was found on him. The Great Wall Plan was a weapon defense system used by Xianxia state to this day. After several updates, its performance became more and more stable. It could be regarded as one of the core secrets of Xianxia state. At that time, Li Guangtu authorized to get the Great Wall Plan and had a call record with Li Pingqing. All these were recorded in the file. There was no doubt about it. Because of this, Li Guangtu's treason case quickly came to a conclusion when it caused a great sensation. When it happened, I didn't have any practice with Li Pingqing. Li Guangtu said lightly. Li Huaqing pondered and looked at Li Guangtu. Hu Song, the then minister of the Ministry of Information, intercepted my call signal with Li Pingqing. Where is Hu Song? Li Guangtu suddenly asked. Dead. Yang Feng said lightly. He glanced at Gu Qianchuan and said calmly. After the treason case, Hu Song was promoted to Major General of Xianxia state in the same year and transferred to the Ministry of National Defense. The next year he died in a car accident. Li Guangtu sneered and said nothing. This doesn't mean anything. Li Huaqing said slowly. It really doesn't mean anything. Li Guangtu nodded and said, but I'm not familiar with Li Pingqing. With his age and military rank, he didn't even have an important task in the Li family. At most, he was a little better than a marginal figure. He was at the peak of the fire-flaming realm in his 40s and exhausted his potential. If I really wanted to commit treason, why would I give him such an important task as stealing the Great Wall plan? I was the marshal of Zhou state at that time. There were many experts in the Li family and many talents in the Border Control Corps. No matter how I looked for someone, it was not Li Pingqing's turn to perform such an important task for me. Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes and nodded. Li Guangtu was telling the truth, which could also be regarded as a doubt. With Li Pingqing's status at that time, Li Guangtu would not pay attention to him in any case, let alone let him perform such an important task. Similar doubts were everywhere in the treason case, but they were just speculations. In the face of conclusive evidence, they were not convincing. The most important thing is that I committed treason and joined Annan's state? Li Guangtu sneered, and his voice sounded extremely cold in the dark cabin. Those who believed that I would commit treason at that time were fools. I was a marshal with real power in Zhou state, controlling more than 100,000 of the most elite troops in Zhou state. I entered the parliament of Zhou state at the age of 30 and was the youngest member of parliament in Zhou state. The Li family was the core force of Zhou state, and my father was the war god of Zhou state at that time. Without any accident, I was in the invincible realm at that time. Within 3 or 5 years, I could become the new generation of war god of Zhou state. My status was no lower than that of any director in Zhou state, and I even had more power and more freedom in some aspects. What reason did I have to commit treason? Benefits? What kind of benefits could move the Li family and me like that? Maybe there were such benefits, but could Tiannan afford them? Future? I didn't want the future of Zhou state. What kind of future do I want? I committed treason and joined Annan's state. Were those who believed in this at that time stupid, or did they think I was stupid? Li Huaqing gave a wry smile. The treason case was still controversial until today, and the most fundamental reason was what Li Huaqing said. The evidence of Li Guangtu's treason was conclusive. But he had no motive and no reason. Zhou state was the most powerful country in the world. It was the same more than 20 years ago, even more powerful than it was now. Li Guangtu himself stood at the top of Zhou state. He had all the benefits and future he should have. What Annan state could give, Zhou state could also give and give more. Annan state could not move Li Guangtu at all, let alone make him commit treason. This approach was as ridiculous as an ambitious hero giving up the great country he had worked for to be a lackey for an ordinary gangster. But the evidence is conclusive. You did contact Li Pingqing. How do you explain it? Gu Qianchuan suddenly asked. I didn't contact him. Li Guangtu suddenly paused and narrowed his eyes. Guangtu, what do you want to say? Yang Feng's heart moved. Li Guangtu was silent for a long time and then slowly said, Li Shi, he was by my side. His eyes became more indifferent and disgusted. Gu Qianchuan smiled. With strong provocation in his eyes, he said meaningfully, Li Shi is by your side now. Li Guangtu gave him a cold look and did not speak. It was well known that Li Shi was Li Guangtu's woman at that time. Therefore, Li Shi personally testified in Li Guangtu's treason case, which was a powerful blow to pull the Li family down from the clouds. And now, Li Shi became the wife of the governor of Kunlun City, but she betrayed Kunlun City and once again stood by Li Guangtu's side. Even if she appeared again to testify for Li Guangtu that he did not commit treason, how credible could it be? Chapter 688. Everyone knew the meaning of Gu Qianchuan's words. To some extent, the treason case was not complicated, but it was unsolvable. The Major General of the Border Control Corps and the Minister of Information Department of the Corps were two key figures. But the key figures were dead. As for Li Guangtu, he was the person concerned and could only represent his own position. The other people who participated in the treason case were also people who benefited from it. The Wang family of Beihai would certainly not disclose the truth of the treason case. Summer Solstice united with Kunlun City, and Kunlun City contributed a lot. But after the incident broke out, the high-level pressure was all operated by the Wang family of Beihai. No matter how many causes there were, at least in this matter alone, the Wang family of Beihai was not glorious. If they disclosed the truth, it was impossible. As for Kunlun City, it was even more impossible. If Li Guangtu had not been exposed, the massacre of more than 100,000 troops of the Border Control Corps would have been blamed on Kunlun City. This was a real disaster. In this way, Li Shi became extremely critical. Everyone understood Gu Qianchuan's meaning. Everyone also understood Li Guangtu's meaning. At that time, Li Guangtu did not guard against Li Shi. She was by Li Guangtu's side. When the incident happened, if Li Guangtu contacted Li Pingqing, it could only be done by Li Shi, and she received orders from Kunlun City. This was Li Guangtu's subtext. As for the Minister of Information Department, he was mostly from Kunlun City or the Wang family of Beihai, so that he could forge Li Guangtu's authority and get in touch with the Great Wall plan. This was actually not important. After all, Li Pingqing and the Minister of Information Department had been dead for many years. Any evidence had been wiped out. Now the only key figure was Li Shi. Li Shi stood by Li Guangtu's side. At the end of the treason case, she personally admitted that Li Guangtu had committed treason. No matter how the outside world really felt about her, it was not an exaggeration to say that her approach was righteous, to put family before righteousness. She had already testified once. Later she joined Kunlun City and became the wife of the governor. If she told the truth in this capacity and proved that Li Guangtu did not commit treason, Zhou State could accept it and launch an investigation. But now Li Shi stood by Li Guangtu in the chaos of Eastern Europe. Under such circumstances, what was the point of her telling the so-called truth? The meaning of a witness had long become untrustworthy with her constant wavering. Even if Li Shi told the truth now, Kunlun City could easily say that Li Shi was slandering them. Now Li Shi could not be regarded as evidence. Li Shi was not the evidence, which meant that there was no evidence in the case of treason. If this kind of problem were to be solved by arguing, there wouldn't be any results even if they talked for 100 years. Li Guangtu narrowed his eyes and looked at Gu Qianchuan. Fearless? He suddenly asked. For Zhou State. Gu Qianchuan was indifferent. Li Guangtu smiled and didn't say much. After all, Gu Qianchuan's account of the treason case was too general. Although everything that happened that year was not perfect, it was an extremely sophisticated scheme. Some details were suspicious everywhere. Li Shi could no longer be regarded as evidence now. However, Li Guangtu was the person involved. How could it be possible that he didn't know anything? If he told them everything he knew, Kunlun City would definitely be in trouble. However, Kunlun City was full of troubles, which was not what Li Guangtu wanted. It was not even attractive to him at all. It doesn't matter what the truth is. Li Guangtu said lightly, more than 20 years ago, I had a clear conscience about Zhou State. Li Guangtu slowly sat up straight, looked into his eyes and said in a deep voice, what about more than 20 years later? Today, more than 20 years later, Zhou State feels guilty about me. It doesn't matter. But I will take back what used to belong to me. Li Guangtu's voice was calm. He was telling the truth. Perhaps many people cared about the truth of that year, but as the person involved, he didn't care about it the most. The so-called innocence seemed ridiculous at their level. Treason or any other crime was good. In the final analysis, it was actually a failure. The treason case was just a conspiracy of Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai. He lost, so he had to leave Zhou State with the crime. It had nothing to do with right or wrong, loyalty or treachery. Only success or failure determined everything. That was all. Therefore, Li Guangtu didn't care about the so-called truth. He only cared about gains and losses. In the room that fell silent again, he turned his head and looked out of the window. The night had completely fallen. Outside the room there was still a faint noise. Li Guangtu didn't need to look to know that at this moment, many people were surrounding Li Tianlan with money, resources and power, trying to help Li Tianlan plan the future of the Li family. The Li family that belonged to Li Tianlan. Li Guangtu's eyes were a little cold. Compared with Kunlun City, Li Tianlan was the biggest problem that he needed to consider first. When he met Li Huaqing today, he didn't intend to figure out the so-called truth from the beginning. But in the more than 20 years of losing contact with Zhou State, it had always been Kunlun City and the Wang family of Beihai guiding the direction of the treason case. Li Guangtu met Li Huaqing today to provide Zhou State with a new perspective, a perspective of the Li family to look at the treason case many years ago. This was the premise for his return to Zhou State in the future. His injury could be healed and the purgatory of heaven capital would not be divided. When his injury was healed and he returned to Zhou State with the purgatory of heaven capital, what was Kunlun City? Li Guangtu didn't deny that he looked down on Kunlun City. He really looked down on it. How deep could a so-called martial arts force that had been bowing to the Li family have after more than 20 years of development? Kun looking up and down in Kunlun City, there was no one who could attract Li Guangtu's attention at all. In contrast, Li Tianlan was the one who made him feel threatened. To resist foreign aggression, one must first stabilize the internal situation. Li Guangtu would only attack Kunlun City when the internal problems were solved. Otherwise, even if he took out the so-called truth today and beat Kunlun City beyond redemption, it would be meaningless for him. After all, from the standpoint of Zhongzhou State, even if Kunlun City was destroyed, Zhongzhou State would be more willing to hand over the special warfare system to Li Tianlan, the future heavenly son, than to consider Li Guangtu, whose standpoint was subtle. Li Guangtu dared to let Kunlun City continue to occupy the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State, but he dared not let Li Tianlan sit in that position. So as long as he met Li Huaqing today and let Li Huaqing give him a vague attitude, this meeting would be perfect. And his requirements were not high at all. Li Guangtu turned his eyes and looked at Li Huaqing, saying nothing. Now he was far more mature than Li Tianlan, so he knew better that when a superior faced grievances, the so-called revenge was not the most important thing. The important thing was profit. It was a complete failure for him to take down Kunlun City in a short period of time if he couldn't swallow it himself. Zhongzhou State will set up a task force to reinvestigate the treason case more than 20 years ago. The task force will be directly responsible to me. Personally, I am willing to believe in the loyalty of the Li family. Li Huaqing looked into Li Guangtu's eyes and said seriously. Gu Qianchuan frowned and looked a little pale. The establishment of the task force made him feel uncomfortable, but what made him more uncomfortable was that Li Huaqing had been emphasizing his personal opinion. Of course, I also have absolute trust in Kunlun City. Li Huaqing suddenly smiled and said, there is something strange about what happened that year. I will urge people to investigate. Maybe it is a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? Li Guangtu smiled a little coldly. Li Huaqing waved his hand and said slowly, anyway, the Li family has done meritorious service to Zhongzhou State. If you are treated unfairly, Zhongzhou State will try its best to prove your innocence. Before this matter is investigated clearly, I will persuade the parliament not to take measures against you. During this time you can rest assured to recuperate in Zhongzhou State. Don't worry. Rest assured to recuperate in Zhongzhou State, Li Guangtu said with a faint smile. What if I want to go back to East Island? Li Huaqing's eyes suddenly condensed and became extremely deep in an instant. Li Guangtu looked at him calmly and said nothing. The atmosphere seemed to freeze in an instant. Yang Feng wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Finally he did not speak. It's up to you. After a long time Li Huaqing said calmly, you can go back to East Island. He did not say but everyone knew that once Li Huaqing returned to East Island, it was tantamount to a real treason. Then the old things that happened many years ago were even less important. The whole purgatory of Heaven Capital would face the suppression of Zhongzhou State. Li Huaqing laughed. Are you going back to East Island? His voice was calm, but he looked extremely majestic and powerful in the dim light. I won't give up the territory of East Island. Li Guangtu said flatly. How are you going to deal with Wuji Palace and Jifeng Sword Raining School? Li Huaqing frowned and said, and the royal family of East Island. Daybreak. Li Guangtu shouted. Daybreak, who had been hiding in the dark silently, took a step forward silently. You stay in Heaven Capital. Deal with Wuji Palace and Jifeng Sword Raining School. Li Guangtu continued to order. Without any hesitation, Daybreak nodded. What about the others? The others? Li Guangtu hesitated and finally made up his mind. He said flatly, most of the forces of the purgatory of Heaven Capital have begun to move to Tianan. You are also responsible for this. Got it. Daybreak nodded. Even though he knew very well that he would be suppressed by Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace during the transfer. Li Huaqing did not speak and was deep in thought. I will also go to Tianan. Li Guangtu said flatly, I won't return to East Island or Zhongzhou State. Tianan is the best buffer zone. Even if the royal family doubts, they will not continue to support the purgatory of Heaven Capital, but they will not completely turn against them. So the main opponents of the purgatory of Heaven Capital in East Island are Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace. He glanced at Li Huaqing and suddenly said, I want to make a deal with Zhongzhou State. Go ahead. Li Huaqing raised his eyebrows in surprise. How about exchanging the future special warfare system of East Island for a promise from Zhongzhou State? Li Guangtu laughed. The Purgatory of Heaven capital has been operating in East Island for 3 years. Its foundation is not as solid as a rock, but everything has been stabilized. That is my foundation and I can't give it up. When I return to Zhongzhou State in the future, the special warfare system of East Island will naturally belong to Zhongzhou State. A very subtle change appeared on Li Huaqing's face. East Island's position was extremely important. In international games, East Island was often the first ally that some international powers tried to rope in when they were fighting with Zhongzhou State. And although East Island's territory was small, it was ambitious. Especially in recent years with the ups and downs of the situation in Zhongzhou State, East Island had exposed its ambition for the southern end of Beihai several times. Obviously, they dreamed of recovering their lost land and even wanted to invade Zhongzhou State again. Zhongzhou State had always wanted to control the special warfare system of East Island. If Li Guangtu was willing to return to Zhongzhou State, it would be a good opportunity. But now the Purgatory of Heaven capital. He shook his head and said softly, I don't think the Purgatory of Heaven capital has this ability now. Li Guangtu was seriously injured and could not fight in the next few years. Without Li Guangtu, the Purgatory of Heaven capital would not be able to fight. Without Li Guangtu, it would be hard for the Purgatory of Heaven capital to face the suppression of Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace, especially the royal family. The Purgatory of Heaven capital temporarily retreated to Tiannan. The royal family might not take any action for a while, but the royal family's patience was limited. If Li Guangtu did not make a choice, the royal family would definitely take action against the Purgatory of Heaven capital. The special warfare system of East Island was indeed very good, but if the Purgatory of Heaven capital could not be held, it would be an empty promise. So this has something to do with the promise I want. Li Guangtu's tone was calm. Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes and said, What promise do you want? The Purgatory of Heaven capital will develop in Tiannan, and Daybreak will guard East Island. At most it can guard Heaven capital. I need enough strength to take back East Island. So I hope that the Purgatory of Heaven capital will develop in Tiannan and accumulate strength. If there is any conflict with Emperor East's palace, Zhongzhou State will not intervene. Li Guangtu directly pointed out the most sensitive issue. By then Tiannan and East Island will belong to Zhongzhou State. They will also belong to the Li family. Yang Feng finally couldn't help but frown and shout. Tianlan is also a member of the Li family. So is Emperor East's palace. Li Guangtu was expressionless and stubbornly said, The Li family can only be my Li family. He looked at Li Huaqing and said, What do you think? Tianlan is a talent that Zhongzhou State focuses on supporting. I can't give you an answer on this matter. It must be discussed by the parliament. But we still hope that you and Tianlan can live in peace. After all, we are a family. Li Huaqing said. Li Guangtu was silent for a long time and then lightly repeated, The Li family is my Li family. Kunlun City can send people to help the Purgatory of Heaven capital guard Heaven capital. Gu Qianchuan suddenly said, We are willing to bear part of the pressure from Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace. Kunlun City's help would undoubtedly increase the hope of the Purgatory of Heaven capital to take East Island in the future, which was equivalent to increasing Li Huaqing's bargaining chips. The special warfare system of East Island was important enough. Once they saw a great possibility, they might really give Li Guangtu the promise he needed. At that time, Li Tianlan and Li Guangtu would have a good time fighting in Tiannan, and Kunlun City, which got involved in East Island, could secretly plot the special warfare system of East Island. For Gu Qianchuan, everything was perfect. What is Kunlun City? In the soft and weird voice, Daybreak said with a cold smile, When does the Purgatory of Heaven capital need the help of a third-rate force like Kunlun City? Not only Gu Qianchuan but also Li Huaqing's face darkened. Was Kunlun City a third-rate force? Even if Kunlun City is not qualified, there are 2 invincible realm experts in it. How many are there in the Purgatory of Heaven capital? Gu Qianchuan sneered rudely. In the dark, Daybreak took another step forward, looked at Gu Qianchuan and lightly said, You seem to be a little unconvinced? So what? Gu Qianchuan slowly stood up, his voice cold. If you're not convinced, then go to hell. In the calm voice, Daybreak raised his palm. Buzz. The violent sword energy tore the darkness in an instant and burst out from Daybreak's hand without warning. A dazzling light suddenly appeared in the dark cabin. Countless sword energy swept and whistled like a tide. All the sword energy passed Yang Feng and Li Huaqing and came to Gu Qianchuan in a flash. Gu Qianchuan, who looked pale, was unprepared. He hurriedly raised his one arm to resist. Daybreak clenched his fist. The sharp sword qi suddenly turned into an incomparably majestic force, smashed the domain that Gu Qianchuan had condensed in a hurry and blasted him. Boom! A big hole was broken in the wooden cabin and Gu Qianchuan's body flew out with blood. The violent force poured out of the cabin and spread between heaven and earth. The whole night and the endless wind and rain seemed to be completely twisted and deformed in the roaring force. Outside the cabin, Li Tianlan, who was entangled by the crowd, suddenly raised his head. In his sight, Gu Qianchuan, who was stained with blood, was smashed out like a cannonball. Intentionally or unintentionally, he fell exactly where Li Tianlan was. The wind whistled and the momentum was heavy. The endless sword intent turned into a force surging wildly. This blow was the power of the invincible realm. He was the second invincible realm expert in the purgatory of heaven capital. Daybreak. The serious injury in the chaos in Eastern Europe did not make him lose his fighting spirit. Instead, it completely burned his potential. After the chaos, he directly rushed into the domain of the invincible realm with serious injuries. Although his realm was still somewhat unstable, it was still the strength of the invincible realm. Li Tianlan frowned and raised his palm. The wind was calm. But in an instant, everyone present was awestruck. At this moment, the whole world seemed to turn into a stream of sword energy with Li Tianlan's movements. It was dignified, complete and natural. The vast sword energy rolled through everyone's bodies and once again blew Gu Qianchuan's body away. In the night sky, the mighty force was constantly obliterated along the way by the sword energy. The overall direction of the movement was the cabin with a hole. The constantly erupting force completely disappeared under the suppression of the sword intent. In the dark environment of the cabin, Daybreak suddenly took a few steps back. With a muffled groan, 2 streams of blood came out of his nostrils. Li Tianlan put down his palm and his eyes were cold. In the cabin, Li Guangtu looked at Daybreak and asked attentively, "How is it?" Daybreak gave a wry smile and shook his head. Li Tianlan's voice sounded through the night, extremely cold. "This is the Li family's territory. Do you really think you can do whatever you want here when you enter the invincible realm? Do you think I haven't killed an invincible realm expert?" Chapter 689. The whole mountaintop seemed to be quiet for a while. The majestic power was completely torn apart by the sword qi, and it seemed that the endless sword intent broke out in every corner of Lonely Mountain, enveloping the hut where Li Guangtu was. In the sight of countless people, the wooden hut became more and more blurred, and finally became an extremely illusory shadow. Li Tianlan was expressionless and his eyes were full of coldness. More and more sword intent gathered on Lonely Mountain. Li Tianlan took a step forward, looking like he would not let him go. Everyone's scalp went numb. Now no one doubted Li Tianlan's strength, but only under his sword intent could they actually experience the suffocating sharpness and oppression. Li Tianlan did not wait and strode forward. The vast sword intent occupied the night sky, gathered into a hole and turned into a sword energy, completely enveloping the nearby cabin. "Your Highness." A somewhat hurried voice sounded. Li Tianlan turned his head slightly. Ning Ziyuan, the commander of the Tianen Freedom Corps, came over and beside him was Zhou Yuanshan, the governor of Xianxia. The two shook their heads at the same time and Ning Ziyuan said slowly, "The president and Senior Yang are still inside." At the same time, Daybreak's plain voice came out of the cabin, a little hoarse. "I'm sorry, I'm willing to make up for my recklessness." The invincible realm expert who represented the peak of the dark world, bowed his head in public, but the people who heard this did not have much reaction in their hearts, as if it was a matter of course. Everyone was now thinking about the meaning of the second invincible realm expert in the purgatory of heaven capital. After Daybreak broke through, even if Li Guangtu's injury would not recover in a short time, as long as they did not completely fall out with the East Island royal family, they still had the strength to stand firm in heaven capital. What did this mean? This question flashed in Li Tianlan's mind. He snorted coldly, turned and walked directly in the direction of Gu Qianchuan. The crowd automatically made way for him. The grass of Lonely Mountain was stained with blood, spreading for nearly dozens of meters. Li Tianlan walked to the end of the blood and squinted at Gu Qianchuan. Gu Qianchuan's mouth was bleeding and his body twitched instinctively, but his consciousness had fallen into a coma. Li Tianlan looked at him condescendingly and remained silent. He did not care about falling out with the purgatory of heaven capital here, nor did he care about letting outsiders know that his relationship with Li Guangtu was not harmonious. At least for now, this was not something worth keeping secret. There was no place for Li Guangtu in his Li family, and there would be no place for him in Li Guangtu's Li family. It was already well known, so there was no need to hide it. Necessary. But on today's occasion he had to care about the situation of Kunlun City. Kunlun City was the special warfare center of Zhongzhou State, and Gu Qianchuan now represented the entire Kunlun City on the surface. If something happened to Gu Qianchuan at his grandfather's funeral, compared with the purgatory of heaven capital, Li Tianlan himself would be in constant trouble. Daybreak's attack hit Kunlun City and brought trouble to Li Tianlan. At the same time, it represented the purgatory of heaven capital to declare its force to the outside world. Could be said to kill 3 birds with 1 stone. In the face of this situation, Li Tianlan had to show an attitude of not hesitating to fight. Daybreak said he would make it up to them. Li Tianlan did not ask what the compensation was. That was something to be discussed in private. The most important thing now was Gu Qianchuan's physical condition. Gu Qianchuan was not dead yet. This year he was really unlucky. First, his arm was broken by Li Tianlan, then he was seriously injured by Shen Yuanfeng, and now he was severely beaten by Daybreak. His embarrassment fully showed the vitality of an invincible realm expert, which was like a cockroach. But on such an occasion no one admired him at all. They would only think that he was incompetent. The worst invincible realm expert. Li Tianlan looked down at Gu Qianchuan and shook his head. He should be the worst invincible realm expert. It's incredible that he only has this kind of strength in this realm. His voice was clearly heard throughout the audience. Everyone heard Li Tianlan's evaluation of Gu Qianchuan. No one echoed or refuted him. It was estimated that from today on, this evaluation would accompany Gu Qianchuan for a long time, and he might even become a laughingstock in the invincible realm. 2 doctors of the Nalan family rushed over to judge Gu Qianchuan's situation. Li Tianlan did not stop them. He just said lightly, "Will he die?" The serious-looking doctor shook his head. "But the injury is serious, but it should not be fatal." "Oh," Li Tianlan said and waved his hand casually. "Then throw him down the mountain. Inform Kunlun City to pick him up. The funeral is over. Lonely Mountain does not welcome Kunlun City's cats and dogs." The 2 doctors looked at each other, a little embarrassed. But in the crowd, Li Baiyan and Ning Qianqing did not hesitate to walk out, lift the unconscious Gu Qianchuan, and go directly down the mountain. "Throw him to the side of the road. Don't occupy the road and be killed by a car," Li Tianlan said calmly. Li Baiyan smiled and lifted one of Gu Qianchuan's legs with one hand, looking careless. Li Tianlan did not bother to look at this scene. He slowly turned around and looked at Ning Ziyuan, the commander of the Tianan Freedom Corps, standing beside him. He slowly reached out and said, "Commander Ning, we should have a good chat." Not only Ning Ziyuan. Many people present deserved a good chat with Li Tianlan. Ning Ziyuan held Li Tianlan's hand with a smile and said calmly, "Your Highness, please." The illusory but incomparably real sword energy finally slowly dissipated. Beside Li Guangtu, Daybreak finally relaxed his body carefully and let out a long breath. Li Guangtu pondered for a moment and did not avoid Li Huaqing and Yang Feng. He directly said, "If you recover from your injury, how sure are you to defeat him?" Daybreak was seriously injured in Eastern Europe and had not recovered yet. But when he was seriously injured, he forced a breakthrough. After entering the invincible realm, his physical quality was greatly improved and he could barely suppress the injury. But tonight, Daybreak was obviously not in his peak state. It's hard to say. Daybreak looked a little unnatural. He hesitated and said, "Li Tianlan is also injured. His injury may not be lighter than mine." Li Guangtu was slightly stunned. His injuries have been accumulated since the beginning of the chaos in Eastern Europe. The day of death, the day of trial, and the day of termination. His injuries accumulated again and again. Then he went to Beihai, swept away the 7 sword-holding families, killed the heaven-killing saber and fought with Dijiang. Countless injuries accumulated and the burden on his body has been very heavy. In addition, the death of Senior Li should be a great blow to him. Now he can still fight because he is forcibly maintained by the vitality of the dragon vein. No matter how abnormal the recovery ability of the dragon vein is, there is a limit. Daybreak said slowly. Although he had only fought with Li Tianlan for a moment, he could clearly feel that Li Tianlan's seemingly perfect sword intent was actually extremely wild. It was a frenzy that was almost out of control. Obviously, Li Tianlan was also not in his peak state now. Even when he was in Beihai, he was not in his peak state. Li Guangtu's eyes flickered thoughtfully. After the matter in Lin'an was over, Li Tianlan would definitely return to Tiannan as soon as possible. And the Purgatory of Heaven capital would also move to Tiannan. If he seized the opportunity to delay the recovery of Li Tianlan's injury, it would undoubtedly be very good for him. But he could not fight now. Daybreak had to stay in Heaven capital. With the recovery speed of the dragon vein, it was difficult for the rest of the people in the Purgatory of Heaven capital to pose a strong enough threat to Li Tianlan. At this moment, Li Guangtu thought of the mysterious His Majesty. That ally who did not seem to be very reliable should be able to be used. The heavenly son of the age. Daybreak hesitated and laughed at himself. If he recovers from his injury, plus the rumored sword formation of 13 stories. In this era he is probably invincible. Chapter 690. The so-called Tianan referred to a rectangular area that started from the border area of Nanyun in Zhengzhou State and extended nearly 800 miles to the south. After Annan State's several efforts were in vain, the land that once belonged to Annan State was officially defined as a middle area without a master in the hearts of the people in the Dark World, and they called it Tiannan. The total area of Tiannan was less than 40,000 square kilometers. In addition to large tracts of mountains and jungles, there were 6 cities on this land, with a population of nearly 5 million at its peak. After the outbreak of the border war more than 3 years ago, Annan State made several raids to recover the land but was defeated, so it had no choice but to call on the civilians of Tiannan to migrate. After more than 3 years, more than half of the population of this land had left. Now there were less than 600,000 people living on this land. Compared with the population density of Zhengzhou State, this place was really vast and sparsely populated. A vast but relatively limited area, a large but relatively sparse population, all of which established the overall pattern of Tiannan. The situation in Tiannan was not chaotic. The reason why the ownership of this land was not clear was not because of the chaos, but because of the stalemate. In more than 3 years, today's Tiannan could be roughly divided into 5 forces. The first was the rebel force of Annan State. The so-called rebel force was nothing more than a cover. More than 3 years ago, when the 5 dark forces united with Annan State to invade the border of Zhengzhou State, Annan State mobilized most of the army in the north of the country to cooperate with the 5 forces in order to leave a way out for itself to deal with the future accountability of Zhengzhou State. Annan State defined most of the army in the north as rebel force, but in fact they had always been under Annan State's leadership. Now the rebel force gathered at the southern end of Tiannan and occupied 2 cities. In addition, it was close to Annan State and had the endless support of armaments and soldiers from Annan State. It could be said that it was the force with the largest number of people in Annan State. There was another rebel force besides the rebel force. It was the so-called Tiannan Freedom Corps. The Tiannan Freedom Corps, with a total of nearly 30,000 people, used to belong to the Wang family of Beihai. Now it was under the direct leadership of Ning Ziyuan. The most important core combat force in the Freedom Corps was the half of the Thunderbolt Battalion that used to belong to the Border Control Corps, which was also the most important part of the Freedom Corps. This group of people now had nothing to do with Zhengzhou State on the surface. They were also a force holding the banner of the rebel force. In external propaganda, the Freedom Corps also claimed that they were from Annan State. They rose up because they were targeted by Annan State and hoped to have a free land. This was the most interesting phenomenon. The rebel army in the south of Tiannan was the most authentic. Everyone knew that they were the army of Annan State. They had the banner of rebel army, but they were under the command of Annan State. And the Freedom Army. Everyone knew that this was a force belonging to Zhengzhou State, but they seemed to have nothing to do with Zhengzhou State on the surface. Instead they became the real rebels against Annan State. The headquarters of the Freedom Corps was in the north of Tianan, close to Zhou State, and they also occupied 2 cities. They could be said to be the 2 most powerful forces in Tianan today. In more than 3 years, the territories of the 2 forces had restored the most basic order. Therefore, the cities occupied by the rebel army and the Freedom Corps were also the enemy with the largest population in Tianan. In the central area between the north and the south of Tianan, the Purgatory of Heaven capital, which had a subtle relationship with Annan State, occupied the Purgatory of Heaven capital. The contract with Annan State sometimes made the Purgatory of Heaven capital help the rebel army against the Freedom Corps. But most of the time, the Purgatory of Heaven capital was quietly developing its own foundation. The city where the Purgatory of Heaven capital was located had the smallest population in Tianan, but its scale was the largest among the 6 cities. The last city was the territory of the Freedom Army. Compared with the rebel army and the Purgatory of Heaven capital, the Freedom Army was obviously not a big deal. In troubled times, the Freedom Army formed by the local residents of Tianan, the vanguard of various dark organizations in Southeast Asia who came here to look for opportunities, and the hidden forces of various superpowers. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. Triangulation, etc. Different positions, chaotic camps, good and bad people mixed together, and demons danced wildly. Their existence was not much of a threat to the current superpowers, but it was not weak enough to be ignored. It could be said that it was the most unpopular existence in the hearts of the superpowers. The 5th force was Emperor Dong's palace. To be exact, it was the power represented by Zhou State in Tianan. After Emperor Dong's palace confirmed the development of these forces in Tianan, Zhou State directly handed them over to Emperor Dong's palace. Now the most important link between the Blood Battalion and the Tianan Freedom Corps was Emperor Dong's palace. Emperor Dong's palace was weak in Tianan, but after all, it represented Zhou State, so no one dared to ignore it. But it was undeniable that it was the weakest force in Tianan at present. For the time being, it could only develop quietly in the territory of the Freedom Corps. The light shone in the large war room. There was a screen in the war room. The rectangular map of Tianan was slowly rotating on the screen. A middle-aged man in plain clothes but full of military aura slowly tapped on the screen and said, "This is the current situation. The headquarters of Emperor Dong's palace is now in Tunan City, with a total of about 1,000 people. Most of them are elites of the Sky Academy and the Deep Sea Academy of Zhou State. They have strong combat effectiveness and are equipped with heavy firepower." He stroked his beard and slid the map of Tianan with the other hand. He enlarged the map of Tunan City and continued, "Tianan can be said to be a very regular rectangle. The north and south ends are very long, but the east and west ends are very narrow. The east and west ends of Tianan are the territory of Annan State. At present, Emperor Dong's palace is in the west of Tunan City, about 40 kilometers away from the nearest base of the Freedom Corps. That is the number 3 base of the Freedom Corps. Its main force is infantry, which is about the strength of a division. We will launch an attack in the east of Tunan City to attract the attention of the Freedom Corps. It will not be easy for you to directly attack Emperor Dong's palace in the west. The Freedom Corps is full of elites and responds quickly, so the time left for us to fight is limited. We have to occupy Tunan City as soon as possible. This is the bottom line of this operation. The expected result is to destroy at least 3 bases of the Freedom Corps before dawn and even drive them out of Tianan." The map of Tunan City on the screen froze. The middle-aged man looked at the figure in the main seat of the war room, bowed slightly and said softly, "I hope your corps is as brave and good at fighting as you said." "I'm not bragging about anything." In the leather chair of the main seat of the war room, a strong black man sat there and said in a loud voice, "Our past achievements are enough to prove everything." "Yes, we don't doubt that. This is the basis of our cooperation." The middle-aged man said softly, "But you should know that the Freedom Corps is not an ordinary army. They are elites, the real elites. And we are pressed for time." Indeed. The Thunderbolt Battalion is not easy to deal with. Even if it is only half of the Thunderbolt Battalion, it is still not easy to deal with. But this operation may not be so difficult. The black man stood up. A shadow seemed to appear in the bright war room the moment he stood up. He was extremely tall, at least more than 2 meters, but his strong body did not look bloated. Instead, it was extremely coordinated and well-proportioned, and his every move carried an almost explosive power. The black man came to the map with a calm expression. The death of Li Honghe has a great impact on Tianan. Now the Freedom Corps. Well, in the words of Xianxia State, it's a group of dragons without a leader. The experts in Emperor Dong's palace have also returned to Xianxia State. Minister Jin, the combat capability of my corps is beyond your imagination. We should destroy the headquarters of Emperor Dong's palace within half an hour and join your troops in about 90 minutes. At that time I'll take action myself. I can't guarantee that I can defeat the forces of Xianxia State in Tianan, but I can take Tunan City. This chapter is not over. Please turn the page. There won't be any problem. His voice was calm and composed. Unlike most black men, he did not have exaggerated body language or funny expressions. His voice was not loud, calm, indifferent, and extremely steady. The middle-aged man called Minister Jin opened his mouth wide. He froze for a while and then cried, "How is this possible?" "Nothing is impossible," the black man said lightly, "because I'm Ramiro." Minister Jin stood there in a daze, still in disbelief. He did not doubt the individual strength of the black man. Just as he said, because he was Ramiro. Ramiro Bard. He ranked third on the Holy List in the Dark World, an invincible realm expert and the commander of the Burning Legion. The Burning Legion was a very young dark force. It could not be regarded as a superpower in the Dark World. But in Africa, almost everyone thought that the Burning Legion was the first armed legion in Africa. In Africa, which was constantly at war, it was not hard to imagine how much blood flowed under the First Legion. In particular, there was a divine martial corps in Africa, which was the force that the Wang family of Beihai had placed in Africa for hundreds of years. It was also the largest private legion in Africa, with an army of nearly 300,000 soldiers. But even so, the Burning Legion was still the first legion in Africa. Ramiro Bard was recognized as the first expert in Africa. In some countries in Africa, his status was even comparable to that of God. Since his appearance, countless Africans had always regarded him as their guardian god. He ranked third on the Holy List. It might not sound like a big deal, but that was the ranking more than 3 years ago. It had only been 5 or 6 years since Ramiro entered the Invincible Realm, but the Burning Legion was already known as the First Legion in Africa 10 years ago. This time the Burning Legion entered Tianan on a large scale. Tianan was full of confidence in Ramiro's individual strength. But the Burning Legion solved the Emperor Dong's palace in half an hour and joined the rebel army in 90 minutes. How was that possible? If it was Ramiro himself, he could naturally do it. But this time the Burning Legion that entered Tianan numbered tens of thousands. More than 80% of the elites of the Burning Legion had now left Africa. Even if there were only 5,000 people following Ramiro tonight, 5,000 people could conquer the Emperor Dong's palace in half an hour and join the rebel army in 60 minutes. This meant that they didn't need to rest after the battle. And they could guarantee that they would still have enough combat power after a rapid march of nearly 50 kilometers in an hour. This quality was no worse than the rumored Thunderbolt Battalion. Don't worry. Ramiro smiled and looked confident. I know my subordinates better than you do. So Minister Jin, your task tonight is very simple. You launch an attack in advance. As long as you survive the first period of the Freedom Corps, we will be victorious. He clenched his fists and said in a strong and domineering manner, "After tonight, the whole world will know the Burning Legion again." All right. Minister Jin shrugged. I hope everything goes well. Not hope. Ramiro snorted. It's definitely going well. His thick fingers slid across the screen and drew out a map of the entire Tianan. Compared to Africa, my subordinates and I prefer this place. His fingers drew a big circle on the screen that covered the entire Tianan. His eyes were fanatical. This is the most suitable place for the Burning Legion to develop. Minister Jin remained calm and said softly, then, welcome to Tianan. Ramiro waved his hand, picked up the walkie-talkie and said in a deep voice, begin. End of this chapter. Bookmark for easier reading. Chapter 691. Mr. President, the Burning Legion is on the move. In the war room, the map of Tianan had disappeared. In the communication video that had been encrypted countless times, Minister Jin looked at the serious and cold old man on the screen and said excitedly, Ramiro Bard had left the war room. He would act with the Burning Legion tonight. In the view of Annan State, this was a foolproof guarantee. Very good. In a flat voice, the old man on the screen nodded. Yongqing, you did a good job. From now on, you will stay in Annan and prepare to receive the fruits of our victory. His voice was slow, but it was full of power. Annan State had never been a powerful country in Asia. But Li Songping, the speaker of Annan State who had held the position of speaker for more than 20 years, could be said to be one of the most strong-willed heads of state in the world. Such strength referred to external strength. During his tenure, it meant too many things to Zhou State, such as the many border conflicts and the establishment of the Border Control Corps. He witnessed the case of treason more than 20 years ago and the subsequent multiple invasions, which weakened the strength of the Li family countless times. Without extraordinary courage, this world-famous speaker would not have defined the army in northern Annan State as a rebel army and ordered them to invade the border of Zhou State more than 3 years ago. Yes, I understand. Jin Yongqing nodded positively. He was the Minister of Defense of Annan State, not a deputy. His function was similar to the National Defense of Zhou State, but his power was not a nominal position like the National Defense of Zhou State. His position in Annan State was equivalent to that of Dongqing Wudi in Zhou State. He was the confidant of Li Songping, the Speaker of Annan State. Mr. President, Ramiro is very confident, not only in himself but also in his troops. According to him, his Burning Legion is no less elite than the Thunderbolt Battalion of Zhou State. Tonight, with Ramiro in person, we can at least take Tunan City. Li Songping nodded thoughtfully. So, as long as he succeeds, he will ally with the Burning Legion according to the plan. As long as he can promise to restore the order of Annan State in his territory, the land he conquered can be handed over to the Burning Legion. Jin Yongqing nodded with a smile and said in a calm voice, "Don't worry, Mr. President. I know what to do." The speaker nodded but did not hang up the communication. "Speaker." Jin Yongqing hesitated for a moment before calling out. "Don't you think?" The president was deep in thought. "Is it strange that the Burning Legion agreed to form an alliance with us?" It was obvious that he had been thinking about this question for a long time, but he still couldn't find an answer. Jin Yongqing was confused. "What's so strange about it?" "The Burning Legion is the force that has the least stance in the Dark World," the speaker said slowly. "They have experts of the Invincible Realm and are the most powerful armed corps in Africa, but they don't belong to any country. Their standpoint is too liberal. Mercenaries from countless countries in Africa have gathered together. They have no foundation or background, and the whole of Africa is their hunting ground. They rarely participate in the disputes of the underworld. To be exact, the Burning Legion has never been interested in anything outside of Africa. The Burning Legion is very strong and so is Ramiro. However, they have never been ambitious people, or rather, they have never shown any ambition. Even in Africa, the Burning Legion and the Divine Martial Legion clashed a few times, but there wasn't much enmity between them. This also means that the Burning Legion doesn't have their own goals and standpoint. This is a large legion with a total of nearly 100,000 people, but the pattern they show is like a small team with only a few hundred or a few thousand people inside. Can you believe it? As an Invincible Realm expert, the Burning Legion has done the most tasks so far is to accept employment from various countries in Africa. As long as it's about Africa, anyone and any force can do it. They easily hire the Burning Legion. They have a very good reputation, but in the whole of Africa they have no enemies and of course no friends. The most famous thing about the Burning Legion was about 5 years ago. They fought with the Divine Martial Legion of the Wang family of Beihai in a small country in Africa. However, less than a month after the task was completed, they were hired by the Divine Martial Legion to deal with the enemy of the Divine Martial Legion. The most ridiculous thing was that the Burning Legion was hired by someone else after the task was completed, and they stabbed the Divine Martial Legion without saying anything. The Burning Legion had always played the role of the most professional mercenaries. They had no standpoint, and a faction without a standpoint was like the sharpest weapon in the eyes of the major factions. No faction would be bored enough to hate them, but at the same time, no faction would be willing to become friends with them. They used each other, cooperated, and parted ways. It was also because of this that the Burning Legion became the most worthy force to be roped in. 100,000 elite troops and one Invincible Realm expert. No matter who was roped into the Burning Legion, their strength would be greatly increased. For Annan State, which was in urgent need of recapturing Tianan, The Burning Legion was the target they were striving for. Jin Yongqing thought about it for a long time and finally asked, "Is there anything strange about it? The Burning Legion has never intervened in things outside of Africa, so why did they choose to ally with us now? Don't you think the timing is strange?" The speaker said blandly, "After we lost Tianan, we began to contact the Burning Legion. We worked hard for 3 years and now we finally got in touch with the Burning Legion. The Burning Legion has invested too much in Tianan this time. If their plan succeeds, the Burning Legion may leave Africa as a whole and come to Tianan. If Ramiro is so bold, why did he hide in Africa before?" He said meaningfully, "When Li Honghe died, the Burning Legion suddenly came to Tianan. Is it really to form an alliance with us?" Jin Yongqing was shocked. "What do you mean? Look at the agreement between us." The speaker waved his hand. "The Burning Legion plans to complete the migration from Africa to Southeast Asia in a year. Tianan will be their new headquarters. The 6 cities are all under the control of the Burning Legion. They will help us drive away the Freedom Corps, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, the Emperor East Palace and all the free forces. They will also recognize Annan State's territorial rights here. That is to say, as long as we can give the Burning Legion benefits, they will help us deal with the pressure from Zhou State. As the first legion in Africa, they have fought with the Divine Might Corps many times in Africa. There is no doubt that they are elite. Even if they are not as good as the Thunderbolt Battalion, their overall quality should not be worse than that of the Blood Battalion. With the support of our armaments, it is only a matter of time before we take back Tianan." He paused for a moment. "But is that really the case? I don't think there is any other possibility." Jin Yongqing said cautiously, "Maybe Ramiro realized the limitations of the Burning Legion's continued development, so he chose Tianan. He wants to develop slowly, accumulate strength and transform the Burning Legion into a superpower in the Dark World. If that's the case, based on the current situation, Tianan is actually not a good choice. In other words, they should have a better choice. Eastern Europe." Jin Yongqing narrowed his eyes. "Eastern Europe." The speaker nodded. "If he comes to Tianan, he will have to face Zhou State. If he goes to Eastern Europe, he will also have to face Zhou State. But the situation in Eastern Europe is more complicated, the opportunities are greater, the benefits are greater, and the risks are the same. Why did he come to Tianan?" Jin Yongqing thought about it seriously and said subconsciously, "Why? The most likely possibility is that he did not want to come." Conference. The speaker's voice was calm and repressed. "Think about it, Yongqing. There is no force without ambition. If he didn't have ambition, he wouldn't have been able to develop the Burning Legion to where it is today. But all these years he stayed in Africa. They accumulated a huge amount of resources and wealth, but they didn't have a foundation of their own. They didn't even have a real enemy. This isn't a miracle, definitely not. I'm more willing to believe that this is a man-made situation. Ramon used the calmest and most rational thinking to create the Burning Legion today. We shouldn't look at what he has done over the years, we should look at what he hasn't done over the years. He has accurately grasped the bottom line of all the major forces, which is why the current situation is formed. The Burning Legion must have done this on purpose. In addition, he has the support of a mysterious force behind him. The support of a mysterious force. Jin Yongqing's body shook and he interrupted the speaker. The speaker glanced at him and nodded. "Yes. So I am sure that Ramiro does not want to come to Tianan now, but he has no way to refuse." His voice was low. "The so-called commander of the Burning Legion is a puppet." Jin Yongqing took a deep breath. This judgment was too incredible, but it made sense when he thought about it carefully. But who had the guts to make Ramon willingly become someone else's lackey? The Wang family of Beihai. Jin Yongqing suddenly said in a horrified tone. "No, you ignored another force." The speaker said slowly, "Kunlun City. At present, only they urgently need to enter Tianan. The Burning Legion is probably the force that Kunlun City has cultivated in Africa for many years. The exposure of Li Guangtu and the growth of Li Tianlan are enough to make Kunlun City restless. Tianan is currently the best development platform for the Li family. Kunlun City urgently needs to destroy this platform, so the Burning Legion agreed to our invitation. They came here this time not to help us take back Tianan. Most importantly, they want to destroy everything the Li family has here." The speaker sneered. "They're afraid to drive the Li family out of Tianan." In Eastern Europe, the Li family is restrained by the Wang family of Beihai. If it develops in China, several large groups in Zhongzhou state will restrict its development. Jin Yongqing said quickly. Yes. The speaker nodded. Jin Yongqing thought for a moment and suddenly said, "The Burning Legion agreed to our invitation about a month ago, but at that time, there was no news about Li Honghe in the dark world. Li Honghe is not the point at all. The point is the exposure of Li Guangtu's identity. From that time on, Gu Xingyun has begun to plan. The death of Li Honghe is just an opportunity to make Tiannan empty, and it is also an opportunity for us to act directly." "Do we still want to win over the Burning Legion?" Jin Yongqing frowned. "Of course." The speaker did not hesitate. "We should try our best to win over them, and we must do our best to help them in tonight's battle. I'm telling you, this has nothing to do with tonight's battle. I just hope that when all this is over you can go to Zhongzhou state secretly." "Go to Zhongzhou state?" Jin Yongqing was shocked. "Yes." The speaker said, "I don't doubt the ability of Kunlun City, but I'm not optimistic about their future. The Li family may encounter problems, but their rise is unstoppable, either in Tiannan or elsewhere. Kunlun City is destined to lose its foothold in Zhongzhou state in the future. I hope you can secretly contact Gu Xingyun and tell him that when he is desperate, Annan is always his best choice."